Welcome back, my family. Before we dive into tonight's creepy little journey, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who loves a good scare before bed. I would love to know where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. So drop it down in the comments and hype me up a little on YouTube. Now get comfortable, dim the lights, and let us step into tonight's story. In 1840, a rich daredevil spent one night in the most haunted room in London. The only rule was simple: if anything went wrong, pull the red bell cord. Hours later, his friends heard a scream, the bell exploded into sound, and then one gunshot. When they broke in, he was already dead. This is the true story of the bell. In 1840, a rich daredevil walked into a bedroom in London that nobody else would sleep in. He laughed when they told him the stories. He laughed when they warned him about the thing that lived in the corners of that room. And he laughed when the owner pressed an old iron key into his hand and said, "If anything goes wrong, just pull the red bell cord." That was the last time anyone heard him laugh. A few hours later, his friends were sitting downstairs watching a row of tiny brass bells on the wall. There was one bell for every room in the house. Only one of them mattered that night, the one wired to the cord in the haunted bedroom. At first, the house was quiet. The only sounds were the low crackle of the stove, the ticking of a clock, and the soft shuffle of cards as the men tried to play away their nerves. Every now and then, one of them would glance up at that particular bell, the one that would only ring if their friend alone upstairs in that cursed room pulled the cord. He never came down for a drink. He never shouted that it was all nonsense. He never called out to say, "See, I told you it was just a story." Instead, sometime after midnight, the silence shattered. First came the scream, a single ripping sound from the second floor that didn't even sound human. It dropped through the ceiling like a knife, froze every man in that servants' room where they were sitting. For half a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the bell exploded. Not a gentle clink, not a polite little ring. The brass bell wired to that bedroom went mad, slamming against its bracket so hard, it filled the whole room with a harsh metallic shriek. It rang like someone upstairs was hanging on to that red cord, with both hands yanking it again and again, as if their life depended on it. The men ran, their boots hammered on the staircase. The scream kept coming, tearing in and out of their hearing as they climbed. The bell was still rattling behind them, as if the house itself was trying to warn them, too late, too late, too late. And then just as they reached the hallway outside that bedroom door, everything stopped. The scream cut off mid-breath. The bell went dead in an instant. The corridor ahead of them was perfectly still. For a moment, all they could hear was their own breathing and the faint crack of cooling wood. They shouted his name. No answer. They were just about to reach for the handle when one last sound ripped through the door, a single gunshot. When they finally broke the door down, they found him on the bed, eyes wide open, lips pulled back in a silent snarl, hands still locked around the torn bell cord. His pistol lay on the floor with one round missing. There was a fresh bullet hole in the wall. No intruder. No blood. No sign of a struggle. The official report said he died of sudden heart failure under unknown circumstances. But the men who were in that house that night, they told a different story. They said he didn't just spend the night in the most haunted room in London. They said he met the thing that lived there. And when he grabbed that cord and rang the bell for help, something else answered. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the true story behind that room, and the cursed bell that kills you the moment you dare to pull it. It's 2:07 a.m. when I hit record. That number is burned into my brain now, I've seen it on my microwave clock, my phone screen, the cheap digital alarm by my bed. Always in that same blue glow that makes the whole room feel a little too cold. Outside my window, the neon sign from the 24-hour gas station across the street blinks like it's struggling to stay alive. Fuel. Half a second of darkness. Fuel, half a second of darkness. Each pulse pushes a weird, sickly green light through the blinds, so my walls keep flashing in and out of shadow. Beyond that, the highway hums. It never really stops, just a low, constant growl in the distance, like something big and tired asleep with one eye open. Every few seconds, there's a change in pitch when a semi goes by, a long rush of air and tires. Then the growl settles back to its usual murmur. The AC in the wall unit behind me rattles every time the compressor kicks on, vibrating the thin drywall. The landlord swears it's normal for this kind of unit. It sounds like someone shaking a box of bolts right at my ear. Then, at random intervals, it shuts off with a hollow thump that feels like a door slamming somewhere inside the building. That moment, right after it cuts, is when the whole place feels wrong. The fridge in the kitchen hums on a slightly higher note, a cheap buzzing drone. It clicks, hesitates, then falls quiet too, like it suddenly remembers it's supposed to be dead. For a few seconds, everything mechanical in my apartment stops. No AC, no fridge, no pipes. Just the dim ringing in my ears and the distant highway. That's usually when people say their house is silent. I don't use that word anymore. I'm sitting at a cheap particle board desk I got on sale, the kind that pretends to be wood if you don't look too closely. 2 monitors throw a pale rectangle of light across the clutter. There's a half-finished coffee beside my keyboard, the surface filmed over and cold. A couple of greasy takeout boxes are shoved off to one side, red sauce dried into the rim. My phone is face down to the right black screen, reflecting that blinking neon in a warped little smear. If this were just another night, I'd be scrolling, half watching something, killing time, until exhaustion finally wins. But the cursor blinking in the empty document in front of me isn't for work, and I'm not recording this for myself. I'm talking to you. You with your earbuds in, or your phone propped up on your pillow, or your laptop open next to a dark window you're trying not to look at. You listening to some stranger on the internet tell you a true horror story to fill the hours between now and sunrise. I used to be exactly like you. I've always liked this stuff. The true crime podcasts, the unsolved mysteries, the based on real events, horror videos with the thumbnails that look like security camera stills. I loved the feeling of getting scared in a way that didn't matter. You know, shivers, goosebumps. Then you lock your phone, turn on another light, and remind yourself it's just a story. That changed the night I found the name Sir Robert Warboy. I wasn't looking for him. Not specifically. It started the way these things always start. I clicked on one article about a true haunting in some English townhouse, finished it, and the algorithm dragged me deeper. Old blog posts, paranormal message boards that look like they haven't been updated since 2009, screenshots of textbooks, someone's scanned notes from a local history lecture. The house popped up again and again, 50 Berkeley Square, London. One post called it the most haunted house in London. Another said just one room was the problem, the second-floor bedroom, the one nobody wanted to sleep in. That one had grainy photos attached, the kind where everything looks slightly off because the flash bounced wrong. The bed in those photos was clean, the walls freshly painted, but the captions were full of phrases like awful feeling and didn't sleep a single minute. It was late. Later than it is right now. The gas station outside was empty. The clerk had propped the door open to let the night air in, and every time someone drove by, their headlights skimmed over my ceiling like they were searching for something. I should have closed the laptop. Instead, I followed a link to a PDF badly scanned crooked pages. You could see someone's fingers in the corners on a few of them. At the top of the first page were 3 words that didn't match the file name Coroner's Inquest, 1840. I remember the way my scroll wheel felt under my finger. I remember the buzz of the fridge, the faint whistle of air through the window frame. I remember thinking, it's just history. It's fine. And then I saw his name, body of Sir Robert Warboy, aged approximately 30 years, found deceased at premises known as 50 Berkeley Square. My eyes tripped over the rest, found rigid on the bed, eyes wide open, clutching a length of red cord, no visible wounds, heart failure under unknown circumstances. I scrolled back up without meaning to, just to look at the address again. 50 Berkeley Square, the one from the forums, the most haunted house in London. I wish I could tell you I felt some huge cold rush of dread in that moment, some sign from the universe that I was crossing a line. The truth is, it just felt interesting, like I'd found a hidden bonus chapter in a book I thought I'd already finished. I saved the PDF, downloaded a few more, opened 6, 7, 8 tabs with different versions of the same story: a locked bedroom, a dare, a bell rope, and a man found dead with his face twisted in terror. That's how it started. Back then, the sounds in my apartment still meant nothing. When the microwave beeped in the dark kitchen, I thought, oh, right, I left my coffee in there. When the elevator chimed in the hall outside, it was just a neighbor coming home late. When someone rang the intercom downstairs by mistake and the buzzer crackled, I swore under my breath and hit the button to ignore it. Noise was just noise. Now every time something chirps or rings or chimes in this building, my brain checks it against another sound, a sound described in shaky handwriting 186 years ago in one of those inquest documents. The old servant bells at 50 Berkeley Square. My phone screen lights up with a soft ding that makes my heart jump into my throat. It's just an email. Spam. A sale I don't care about from a store I don't remember going to. I swipe it away too fast, irritated at myself for reacting. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator doors slide open with a muted shink, and the standard electronic tone, one bright note, cheerful and flat. It's supposed to be friendly, but at this hour it feels like something clearing its throat. The building intercom downstairs buzzes once angrily, then quiets. Maybe someone forgot their keys. Maybe someone hit the wrong button. The sound crawls up through the pipes and wiring and dies somewhere in my ceiling. All of this is in the background as I sit here, fingers hovering over the keyboard cursor, blinking like a heartbeat. If you're expecting a performer right now, someone who's going to milk this for jump scares and fake screams and demon voices, you're going to be disappointed. I'm not doing this to entertain you. I'm doing this because somewhere between the first article I clicked and the moment I realized I could hear things on my own recordings that weren't there in the room, something important broke. I used to trust silence. Silence meant the show was over. The story was done, the thing in the dark had either gone away or never existed in the first place. Now I know better. The story I'm about to tell you is as far as I can prove true. The dates, the names, the place, they're all there in ink on paper and archives you can visit yourself if you really want to. I'll stick as close to those facts as I can, even when it makes the whole thing feel worse. The parts that involve me. The nights in this apartment when the AC cuts off, the fridge stops humming, and something small and metallic sings in the walls. Those parts I can't prove. You can decide what you want to believe by the time I'm finished. For now, I just need you to listen. Really listen. Because this all starts with a house in London, a second-floor bedroom no one wanted, and a bell that once it started ringing didn't stop when the wires were pulled out of the walls. The first time I saw his name, It almost slid right past me. It was just one more line in a wall of grainy text on my laptop screen, black letters on a yellowed background. Somebody had scanned from a British newspaper and shoved into an online archive 20 years ago. If I'd been even a little bit more tired, or if my connection had lagged and the page hadn't loaded right away, maybe I would have closed the tab and gone to bed. Instead, the page snapped into focus, and there it was. Mysterious death of a young nobleman at Berkeley Square. My cursor hovered over the headline like I was afraid of clicking it too hard and tearing the page. The scan was crooked gray at the edges where the paper had curled. You could see the shadow of the person's hand in the corner, holding it flat on the scanner. It felt almost intrusive staring at it that late at night. Outside, a semi roared past on the highway, its engine pitch rising and falling like a siren. The neon from the gas station flickered. My apartment smelled like old coffee and cardboard. Inside my headphones, the digitized newspaper crackled into clarity. The article wasn't long. A few short paragraphs in the middle of a page filled with advertisements for patent medicines and ships departing from Liverpool. Yesterday morning, the body of Sir Robert Warboy, aged approximately 30 years, was discovered lifeless upon a bed at number 50 Berkeley Square. I remember reading his name out loud under my breath, just to hear how it sounded. Robert Warboy. The word war and boy jammed together like a bad omen. The article went on in the stiff, careful language of the time he'd been found in a state of great agitation, with features contorted as if in mortal terror. No marks of violence, no signs of poison. The death excited much remark in the neighborhood, since number 50 was already rumored to contain a haunted chamber. Haunted chamber. That phrase hooked itself into something soft in my brain and didn't let go. I clicked the little next page arrow, then the previous page, looking for more. Sometimes old papers ran multiple articles about the same event. A follow-up, a letter to the editor, a breathless column from someone who claimed to know the family. Here, though, it was almost like they were afraid to say too much. One short article about a nobleman who went to bed and never woke up in a house people whispered about. Then nothing. I stared at the date, 1840. I stared at the address, 50 Berkeley Square, London. Even through the screen, those details made it feel real in a way no creepshow forum post ever had. This wasn't some copy-paste chain story. This was a death notice in a national paper carefully typeset by men in ink-stained shirts who didn't have time for ghost stories unless something had really rattled them. I opened a new tab and typed the address into the search bar like it was any other curiosity. Street View pulled up a wide shot of Berkeley Square, clean and green in modern daylight. Cars parked neatly along the curb. Trees in full leaf. The camera pivoted, and there was the house, tall, brick, respectable. If you walked past it today, you wouldn't think that's where someone died, with his face twisted up in terror, clutching a bell cord that no longer exists. You'd think nice place. Must cost a fortune. Even back then, the article said it was a most fashionable address. Tenants with money, gentlemen's clubs nearby, walking distance to power and gossip. It was the kind of neighborhood where bad things weren't supposed to happen without an explanation ready by morning. This time, there wasn't one. Somewhere between the third reread of that tiny obituary and the cheap desk lamp buzzing over my head, curiosity turned into something heavier. I needed to know what happened in that bedroom. A few days later, I was sitting not at my desk, but in the back corner of the city library's special collections room, under fluorescent tubes that hummed like angry insects. The room always smells the same dust cardboard, the faint sweetness of old glue, and that dry, papery smell you only get from things that have outlived everyone who ever touched them. The librarian slid a small stack of microfilmed records across the table to me. club membership rolls, property documents, a couple of scanned letters from a man who'd lived on Berkeley Square and apparently complained about everything. "Handle the sleeves by the edges," she said, like I was holding something that could crumble. "If you need more buzz, the desk." Her footsteps faded down the carpeted aisle. Somewhere on the other side of the stacks, a printer coughed out a page. Someone cleared their throat. Then the room settled into that strange, padded, quiet libraries have, like the air itself is trying not to disturb the books. I threaded the first reel into the reader and spun forward, the film squeaking softly. Black and white frames flicked by. Names, addresses, meeting minutes from an exclusive gentlemen's club in London. There he was, Sir Robert Warboy, admitted as a member in the late 1830s, noted as a spirited young man of means. That was the kind of phrase you used when you wanted to say someone was wild without saying it. Later reels held property transfers for number 50 Berkeley Square. Every now and then, a tiny note in the margin rent reduced new tenant complaint about servants. But one comment made me stop and backtrack. In spidery ink, next to a brief note about a lease not being renewed, upper room deemed unsuitable by lodger. Complaints of night fears. Night fears. I turned that over in my mind while the microfilm whirred. It sounded childish and clinical at the same time, what you'd write when you didn't believe in ghosts, but also didn't want to sleep on that floor anymore. The deeper I dug, the more the same phrases kept surfacing like bones in the dirt-haunted room. Most haunted house in London. Second floor chamber. Nameless Thing. That last one came from a letter, not a record. The paper was so thin, you could see the ghost of the handwriting on the opposite side. Some anonymous visitor writing to a friend about an unpleasant stay in the house at Berkeley Square. And I will not stay another night where that nameless thing moves along the walls after dark. The bells ring when no one pulls them, and I swear upon my life something tugged at the counterpane as I lay helpless. The bells. I started seeing them everywhere. Little throwaway mentions in servants' manuals, in old novels, in household guides, long strings of cord running inside the walls of rich London townhouses, connecting every bedroom and parlor to a row of bells downstairs. Each bell had a label. Parlor, front bedroom, master's room. Back then, if something was wrong upstairs, the first thing anyone did was reach for the cord and pull. Sitting in that overlit library with the microfilm machine whirring and some stranger's cough echoing off the shelves, I felt a weird jolt of what recognition I'd never had servants. I'd never lived in a townhouse with bells. I grew up with cheap plastic doorbells that played tinny melodies when someone pressed them too hard, and later phone notifications that chirped exactly the same whether it was good news or bad. But I understood the impulse: if something scares you, you reach for help. You hit the button. You ring the bell. The more I read about Robert, the harder it was to keep him flat on the page. He stopped being Sir Warboy in careful ink and started being a very specific kind of guy I'd met 100 times in different forms. The one who jumps off the roof into the pool because everyone is watching. The one who drives home drunk and laughs about it later. The one who hears a story about a haunted room and thinks, that sounds like a dare. A fellow thrill seeker. The guy who pushes too far because he needs to feel something other people don't. The more I pieced together the outline, the bet at the gentlemen's club, the walk to the townhouse, the key, the bedroom, the bell cord, the more that weird sympathy twisted into something else. Maybe guilt. Because if I'm being honest, if I'd been born in 1810 instead of 19-something, if I'd had money and status instead of a mid-range lease off a main road, I can see myself in his chair, laughing too loud, saying, sure, I'll do it. It's just a story. At first I thought I was chasing a ghost. Just another haunting with a neat hook for a thumbnail man dies in haunted bedroom after ringing bell for help. But the longer I stayed in that library, surrounded by the faint buzz of the lights and the clack of distant keyboards and the occasional hiss of the HVAC when it kicked on, the more I realized this wasn't just about a room. It was about what happens to you once you know what a sound might mean. A bell in a quiet house used to mean a master wants tea. A guest is ready to go to bed. Someone needs another log on the fire. Then, in one house on Berkeley Square, a bell started to mean someone upstairs is seeing something you don't ever want to see. Someone is pulling this cord because they're more afraid of what's in the room than what might answer. And once you know that once you let that idea into your head, every little ring and ping and chime in your own life starts to sound different. Back then, I didn't understand that yet. Back then, under the hum of library lights and the stink of toner, I thought I was just digging up a dead man's night. I had no idea that by pulling on that first thread, his name in that old newspaper, I'd started tugging on a bell cord that was still connected to something. The night I finally heard it, I was doing exactly what you're doing right now. Staring at a glowing screen in a dark room long after any sane person should have gone to sleep. I had the inquest open on one monitor, the scanned newspaper article on the other, and a blank document in the middle. The cursor blinked like it was getting impatient. I wanted to start actually writing, not just reading about this dead man from 1840. I wanted to shape the story, make it make sense, pull it into something that felt like a clean line from bet to body on the bed. For once, my apartment had settled into one of those rare moments where everything lined up just right. Outside the gas station's neon sign had finally given up for the night. It was just a dull rectangle of light now, no more flickering green pulses across my walls. The highway hum was softer, like traffic had thinned out to a slow, occasional whoosh. The AC unit was off. The fridge was on. You don't realize how much those sounds matter until you live alone. You start to notice the pattern, the AC rattles, then cuts. The fridge buzzes, clicks, goes quiet. The building creaks once in a while like it's shrugging its shoulders. It's predictable. It's almost comforting. On this night, it was balanced. The AC had just done its hollow thump and shut up. The fridge picked up the slack with a steady low hum that you don't hear until it stops. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. My fingers hovered over the keys. I had the opening line forming in my head. Something about a rich man and a bad bet and a room nobody wanted. I was right there about to type it when I heard the sound. Just one sound. A single bright metallic ting. It wasn't loud. If anything, it was small, like someone had flicked the edge of a tiny brass bell with their fingernail somewhere in the wall behind my head. Every hair on my arm stood up at once. For a second, I didn't move. It hit so cleanly and so sharply that my brain had to run through the list of what it might be before my body could decide whether to panic. I glanced down at my phone first. The screen was dark. No new notifications. No lit-up app icons. No missed calls. I tapped it just to be sure. The lock screen came up with nothing but the time and date. No banners, no sounds. The oven, I turned my head toward the kitchen, listening for the little chime my stove makes when a timer runs out. Nothing. The LED clock on it had the same boring digits it always does, no blinking or flashing. I hadn't even used it that night. The building intercom, when someone buzzes my unit from downstairs, it doesn't ting. It buzzes. Loud, angry insect hum rattling the speaker by my door until I smacked the button to shut it up. This sound hadn't come from over there anyway. It had come from behind me. I sat very still, suddenly aware of how many times I'd read the word bell in the last week. Bell cord, servant's bell, row of bells, bell that rang without being pulled. I told myself it had to be something normal I just hadn't cataloged yet. A pipe contracting, maybe. some piece of metal cooling, the heater in the unit next door, anything but what it sounded like, which was undeniably like a bell. I pushed my chair back slowly, trying not to make noise as if the sound could be spooked. The wheels squeaked anyway. My heart was thudding too hard for such a small apartment. The hallway outside my front door was suddenly very interesting. I walked over bare feet, sticking a little to the cheap laminate flooring. My hand found the chain first, then the deadbolt. I unlatched them with tiny clicks that sounded enormous in the quiet. Before I opened the door, I leaned toward the peephole and squinted. The fisheye lens stretched the hallway into a warped tunnel, beige walls, thin gray carpet. The exit sign at the far end, glowing dull red. One overhead fluorescent tube buzzed faintly, throwing a tired white light over the elevator doors. No one there. No kids playing a prank. No neighbors standing outside with their phones out trying to get a signal. I opened the door anyway, just enough to stick my head out. The hallway smelled like stale air and industrial cleaner. No bells, no chimes. I stood there longer than I needed to, pretending to check my mail slot, listening for footsteps or the drag of something against the wall. All I got was the distant cough of plumbing in another unit and the rumble of the elevator descending from some higher floor. The fluorescent light flickered once. I watched it too intensely, waiting for a second flicker that never came. "Get a grip," I muttered to myself, backing into my apartment again. "You've been reading about bells all week. You're primed. It's just something. Just something." The door shut with a soft thud. I turned the lock, slid the chain back into place, and stood there with my hand on the knob for a few seconds longer than necessary. The fridge hummed. The bathroom fan, which I'd left on without thinking, whined faintly behind the door across the hall. Above me, my upstairs neighbor walked across their living room, slow, heavy footsteps that made the ceiling creak. Normal sounds. Real sounds. I made myself do a full lap of the apartment, partly to prove that everything was fine, partly because sitting back down immediately felt like walking backward into something. I checked the bathroom light off, fan on. The mirror was fogless, the sink dry. Nothing metal had fallen or moved. The kitchen, the sink, had a couple of plates stacked in it, fork balanced on top. The fork was exactly where I'd left it. No spoons rattling in the drawers, no pots settling on the stove. The fridge vibrated gently under my hand when I touched it. Its hum was steady, almost soothing. I even opened the pantry for no good reason, as if a bell might be hanging from the shelf like a wind chime I'd forgotten I owned. Cans, boxes, cereal, no bells. By the time I circled back to the desk, I'd talked myself down to a thin, fragile version of calm. I told myself it had been a random noise my brain misfiled, because I'd saturated it with old descriptions of servant bells. You can't read about something that specific for hours and not start hearing it. Right. I sat down again, the chair creaking like it always did. My monitors had dimmed slightly. The cursor on the empty document still pulsed, patient and relentless. "Fine," I said quietly to no one. "Fine. We start. We actually start." My fingers found the home row automatically. The story I'd been half-drafting in my head settled into place late one evening in 1840, a group of men standing on the front porch of a London townhouse in one of the richest neighborhoods in the city. The address, 50 Berkeley Square. The reason they were there, a bet. A stupid, arrogant bet from a man a lot like me in all the wrong ways. I tried not to think about the tiny metallic ting I'd heard behind my wall. I tried not to picture a row of tarnished brass bells hanging in a dark servant's room thousands of miles and almost 2 centuries away. Instead, I took a breath, stared at the blinking cursor, and dragged you back with me to the night a rich, bored nobleman named Sir Robert Warboy, knocked on a very expensive door, laughing, and walked willingly into the most haunted room in London, thinking this was all just a game. I've read so many accounts of him now that when I picture that night, it doesn't feel like history anymore. It plays like memory. If I close my eyes, I'm not at my cheap desk in an American apartment with an AC unit rattling in the wall. I'm there in London in 1840, standing just inside the doors of a gentleman's club that no longer exists, breathing in smoke and money and boredom. The air is thick with cigar haze, the kind that makes the ceiling look lower than it is. Gas lamps glow along the walls and on small tables, turning everything a heavy yellow. Faces, shirt fronts, glass rims, all stained the same uneven honey color. Glasses clink softly as men lift and set them down. There's a constant low murmur of conversation, an occasional burst of laughter that starts too loud and dies too quickly, like everyone remembers where they are. The sound from the street carriage wheels hooves the distant call of a vendor is muffled by heavy curtains drawn across the tall windows. The whole place feels padded, insulated. A room designed to keep the outside world exactly where it belongs outside. And in the middle of it, sprawled in a leather armchair like he owns it, is Sir Robert Warboy. He's 30, but he carries himself like someone who can't imagine being old. The records describe him as handsome in the polite language of the time, but the picture I get is sharper, thick, dark hair, a little too long for fashion, a jaw set in that permanent half-smirk some men are born wearing, the kind of eyes that crinkle when he laughs, because he does it often. He has an estate in the countryside, plenty of money, a name that opens doors. But in the city, he's known for something else. The club logs never say it outright, but you can hear it in the asides. Warboy, that devil, always a game. Lucky to be alive. I've found scraps of stories about him in half a dozen places. A winter night when he jumped off a low bridge into a half-frozen river because someone bet him he wouldn't. He came up laughing teeth, chattering, blue-lipped and triumphant. Another time, a dare to ride a horse at full gallop through a cemetery at midnight. He did that too, spooking the groundskeeper and his own mount in the process, tearing past crooked stones and angels leaning over mossy names. There were pistol games as well, shooting bottles off fence posts from impossible distances, firing a loaded pistol between his own fingers as they splayed on a table, joking that if he misjudged, at least he'd have a story to die for. You know this type. Maybe not in a club with gas lamps, but at parties on back roads in late-night group chats. The one who cannot resist a dare, who treats danger like a stage. That night, he's halfway through a glass of brandy, laughing too loud at a story he's already heard, when someone at the table mentions Berkeley Square. You've seen the house, surely one of his friends says, swirling his drink. Number 50. Fine address. Rotten reputation. Reputation. Robert leans in, instantly interested. Do tell. It's the upper floor, another man says, lowering his voice for effect. The second-floor bedroom. No one will sleep there. The owner can't keep servants if he insists they use it. There's that little shift in the air around a table when something more interesting than politics or stocks surfaces. A few more chairs scrape closer. Cigars burn forgotten between fingers. Someone else adds, had a maid, once a quiet girl. Slept in that room 1 week. By Sunday, she was raving, clawing her own arms, swearing something had been sitting on the bed, watching her every night. They had to cart her off. It's probably exaggerated. Stories like this always are. But there's a kernel of something sharp at the center. I've seen it echoed in letters and marginal notes. People avoid that room. Another man, older with wine-loosened tongue, chimes in. I heard the furniture moves in there after dark. They lock the door, go back in the morning, and the bed is on the other side of the room. Drawers open, curtains twisted, as if some invisible thing was pacing all night, feeling its way along the walls. Someone else says quietly, "They call it the Nameless Thing." I feel the same little pull at that phrase every time I read it, even now. It's more unsettling than if they'd called it a ghost or a demon. Those have categories, rules. A nameless thing is something you can't fully see, can't fully describe, but you know you don't want it near you. Around the table, several men cross themselves or knock on the wood, small gestures they pretend not to believe in. One laughs a little too high, glancing toward the bar, as if to make sure no one at another table is listening. Robert, he grins. "Utter nonsense," he says, waving a hand through the cigar smoke. Servants talk. They always have. Give them a drafty room and a creaky floorboard, and suddenly the devil himself has moved in. "You don't believe a word of it," his friend says, but it isn't really a question. "I believe rich men like to scare themselves," Robert replies. "And they like to blame nameless things when their maids go mad, rather than look at how they treat them." He shrugs. Ghosts make better gossip. There's a nervous ripple of laughter. Someone shifts in their seat. One of the men, already a little drunk, cheeks flushed under the lamplight, leans forward, eyes glittering. This is the moment that gets recorded in every retelling, sometimes word for word. "If you're so certain," he says, "spend a night there." The table goes very still. It's amazing how fast a room like that can go from comfortable noise to this fragile, expectant silence. You could hear the crackle of the gas jets, the soft thud of a boot heel, shifting under the table, the tick of a clock on the far wall. Robert stares at him, then laughs, delighted. It's like someone has just handed him a present. "The haunted room at number 50, he says. "You'll have to do better than that if you want to scare me." "I'm not trying to scare you," the man says. "I'm offering you a bet, one night alone in that room. From, say, 10 in the evening until sunrise. No servants, no companions. Just you. And the nameless thing," another friend adds, half joking, half not. "At your disposal," someone else murmurs. They start talking numbers, how much money, whose what odds. It isn't really about the cash. They're all well off enough that no one bet is going to ruin them. What matters is bragging rights. The story. If this were a movie, you'd expect Robert to hesitate at least a little. To ask a question. To glance around and see if anyone at the table looks genuinely scared. He doesn't. He doesn't even let them finish outlining the conditions. "Done," he says. "I'll do it." A few of them groan, partly in admiration, partly in, "Oh God, what have we started?" One laughs nervously. Another shakes his head with a look that says he really will. "Let's make it interesting," Robert adds. "I'll take a pistol. If your thing shows itself, I'll put a hole in it." The older man who mentioned the furniture moving shifts uncomfortably. "That won't be necessary." Robert grins wider. "On the contrary, it'll make a better story." They hammer out the details, then the date soon before anyone can lose their nerve, the hour he must enter the room, the condition that he cannot leave before dawn unless he forfeits the wager. He may take his pistol oil lamp and whatever else he deems reasonable, but no companions. Someone suggests, half in jest, half serious, that they should at least warn the owner. That man is Charles Benson, the current tenant of 50 Berkeley Square. He's not there tonight, but he's a member of the same club. They agree to send word to make sure the house is prepared. By the time the brandy is gone and the cigars have burned down to their nubs, the bet is a solid shape between them. Robert will sleep in the haunted bedroom. The rest will wait for morning and his triumphant retelling. I can't help thinking every time I replay this scene how familiar it feels. Different costumes, different stakes, same route. A group of people cheering on the one who always pushes a little too far, as if daring him is the same as doing it themselves. They don't know it, but that whole room has just reached up and tugged on a bell cord they can't see. It's already ringing, they just can't hear it yet. In my head, the night they go to 50 Berkeley Square is damp. The records don't specify the weather, but London in the 1840s might as well have a permanent light drizzle unless proven otherwise. Fog hugging the cobblestones soft and low, swallowing the lower halves of carriage wheels. The carriage carrying Robert and his friends rattles over uneven stones, its lanterns throwing ovals of jaundiced light that stretch and warp in the mist. Hooves clop rhythmically. Every so often the driver cracks his whip, and the sound snaps off the stone fronts of houses like a caught breath. Inside, the men are quieter than they were at the club. The bravado of brandy and audience is bleeding off into the thick night air. They peer out through fogged glass as the carriage turns into Berkeley Square proper, a wide, elegant space ringed with brick and stone townhouses, a private garden in the middle like a dark hole. Which is it, one asks, breath steaming as he leans toward the carriage window. Number 50, another says, pointing. There. No. 50 is much like its neighbors, at first glance tall, handsome, its windows evenly spaced, its steps scrubbed clean. But there's a difference that's hard to name. Maybe it's the way only a couple of window panes show faint candlelight behind their glass, while the others are black. Maybe it's the particular shadow cast by the decorative stone railings under the sill. When I looked it up on Street View in my own time, the house looked respectable. Modern windows, clean brick, nothing out of place. But I remember feeling the same odd resistance in my chest, the same sense of something watching from the upper floor. As the carriage rolls to a stop in front of number 50, fog curls around the horse's knees. Someone inside murmurs that they can still turn back, that the whole thing is madness. Robert steps out first. His boots hit the wet stone with a solid sound. He looks up at the house like he's sizing up a jump. There's a thrill in him that I recognize with an uncomfortable jerk of familiarity. This is the moment he lives for. Not the story afterward, not even the money, but that second right before he does something dangerous and stupid and irreversible. Behind him, his friends climb down more cautiously. The damp air smells of coal smoke horse and that particular chill you only get near stone. The front door opens before they can knock. In the doorway stands Charles Benson. Middle-aged, neatly dressed, his hair receding just enough to show a shine in the lamplight. Everything about him is orderly, his tie, his cuffs, the straight line of his vest buttons. Everything except his eyes. Records describe him as anxious that night, but I'd go further. In every version of his testimony, there's a sense of a man whose attention is never quite fully on the person in front of him. Part of him is listening for something else. As he steps back to let them in, the sounds of the street muffle instantly. The heavy door shuts behind them with a solid, echoing thunk that rolls down the entry hall. Inside the house, smells of polished wood and coal fires. A runner muffles their footsteps as they step out of their boots and into slippers supplied by the house servants have already whisked the muddy footwear away. The latch of the door still seems to hang in the air. That's how big houses sound. If you've never been in one, imagine the way a stairwell in an old building carries sound. A single door closing can feel like a statement. A grandfather clock stands in a niche partway down the hall, its pendulum ticking too loudly in the quiet. Each tick is a little knock on your nerves. Somewhere deeper in the house, unseen, a coal fire hisses softly, coal settling air, drawing up the chimney, the tiny sigh of burning. Charles leads them down the entry hall with measured steps. His shoes barely whisper on the runner. He speaks in that clipped, courteous way of men used to hiding what they really think behind politeness. Sir Robert. Gentlemen, I confess I had hoped you might reconsider. If we did, Robert says you'd miss out on the entertainment. This is not entertainment, Charles replies almost too quickly. Then he forces a thin smile. But you are here now, and I am a man of my word. The room is prepared as you requested. Prepared. As if they're setting up for a guest of honor instead of feeding someone to a reputation. He shows them into the dining room first, a long space with tall windows heavily curtained against the night. A chandelier hangs overhead, candles burning down in their cups, wax pooling like frozen milk. The table is set, though no food is laid out. A decanter sits near the head of the table, its contents barely touched. Please sit, Charles says. I need a moment to fetch something. They take their places more awkwardly than they did at the club. No one seems sure if this is supposed to be a social call or a wake. When Charles leaves the room, the door clicks shut with a small finality. They're left alone with the ticking clock down the hall, the faint crackle of the fire, somewhere the soft creak of the house settling. One of Robert's friends forces a joke about the honor of being invited to such a fashionable address. Another comments on the quality of the carpets, the molding, anything to keep from glancing at the ceiling and wondering what's directly above their heads. The laughter that follows is thin. It comes out in little bursts that die quickly, leaving longer stretches of silence behind. Reading their accounts now, I can hear them as clearly as I hear my own neighbors through these walls. The way nervous men make too much noise and then get scared of the noise they've made. When I read the descriptions of the house, how the door latch sounded, how the clock ticked, how footsteps echoed on the stairs, I started to hear it in my own living room. The furnace switching on became a coal fire. The creak of the hallway outside my apartment became footsteps on a landing 2 centuries ago. That's the thing about sound. It doesn't care about time. Back at the long table in number 50, a glass rattles faintly against polished wood as someone sets it down too hard. A chair leg scrapes, the clock ticks, the fire hisses, and somewhere overhead, a room is waiting. When Charles comes back into the dining room, he doesn't speak right away. The door opens with a soft click and a wash of cooler air from the hallway. He steps inside the gaslight, catching the faint sheen of sweat at his temples. In one hand, held carefully as if it might bite, is an object small enough to disappear into his palm. He moves to the head of the table. The men fall silent without being asked. For a beat, the only sound is that relentless clock ticking in the hallway and the faint sizzle of the coal fire down the corridor. Then Charles opens his hand. Resting on his open palm is an iron key. It's old-fashioned even for 1840, long shaft, heavy bow teeth, worn smooth at the edges from use. The metal is dark with the kind of patina that comes from years of handling and neglect. He sets it down in the middle of the table. The key lands with a dull metallic clink that seems to reverberate through the wood and into the bones of everyone sitting there. The room changes. It's hard to describe how a single small sound can do that unless you've been in a room when a verdict is read or a phone is put down after bad news. Nothing visible shifts, but everything feels heavier. The air seems to press down. It's a feeling I recognize very well now. It's the same way my apartment feels for a few seconds after the AC cuts off at night and the fridge stops humming, leaving a pocket of unnatural quiet behind. A sort of suspended moment where everything is listening. Silence falls over the dining room in exactly that way. Robert's friends stare at the key like it might start moving on its own. Charles keeps his hand flat on the table for a second longer than necessary, as if reluctant to break contact. When he finally pulls it back, there are faint impressions in the skin of his palm. I have lived in this house for 10 years, he says quietly. In that time, I have used this key 2, perhaps 3 times. He doesn't say which it is, 2 or 3. It bothers me every time I read it. The rest of the time, he continues, it is locked away. Not for my own sake, you understand, but for the sake of those who do not understand what it unlocks. He looks at Robert when he says that last part. It's not a threat. It's not quite a plea. It's more like a final, weary attempt to push a man away from a cliff he's already dancing on the edge of. Robert reaches out without hesitation. The key scrapes lightly as he drags it across the polished wood into his own hand. The iron is colder than it should be, several accounts note. Heavy, too. Not like the slender brass keys that open wardrobes and desk drawers, but like a small piece of the house's spine. His friends watch his fingers close around it. I try to imagine their faces in detail, one man's jaw, tight knuckles whitening around his glass. Another's eyes darting between Robert and Charles, as if hoping one of them will laugh and call the whole thing off. A third trying to smirk, but his mouth doesn't quite commit to it. Envy flickers there, too sharp and sour he wants to be the one with the story. Charles's expression is the most complicated. On the surface, he's composed. His shoulders are straight, his clothes immaculate. But his eyes keep drifting, not to the clock, not to the door, but upward, like he can feel the weight of that second-floor room pressing down through the ceiling. His hand lingers a heartbeat longer than it should as Robert takes the key from him, fingertips brushing iron in a reluctant farewell. It's subtle, but every recollection mentions it in some form. A stutter in the motion, a micro-freeze. "Are you certain you wish to go through with this, Sir Robert?" he asks. There is no shame in declining. Many a man has done so. Quietly, no doubt Robert says, and he sounds genuinely amused. He flips the key once in his hand like a coin, but you'd have a hard time convincing anyone at the club that I was one of them. He pockets the key. The decision is solid now, a physical weight against his leg. Reading this in police notes and personal letters, I can see the clear line everyone else missed or refused to look at. Because here's something that never made it into the official inquest, but shows up in the brittle folds of a private letter stored 3 folders down from the main file in handwriting. Starting to turn brown with age, you must understand, cousin, that Benson was not ignorant of that room's dangers. Some years prior, a Mr. A.H., a guest of his, had pressed him to be permitted to sleep there, laughing at the tales, as men of our sort are wont to do. Benson reluctantly consented. The following morning, they found the man in such a state of agitation that he could not be calmed, his hair turned quite white in the night. He would not speak of what he had seen, only begged to be removed from the house at once. That's one of the 2 or 3 times Charles used the key before this night. Another letter hints at a different incident. Furniture disturbed a servant struck by a fit of uncontrollable terror after entering the room briefly. None of that appears in the neat official language of the coroner's report. On paper, Charles is a concerned but cooperative homeowner baffled by the tragedy. No one mentions previous troubles with the room. Sitting there at the table with the key between them, though Charles knows more than he's saying. He knows that unlocking that door has already led to at least one man leaving his house a different person than he was when he entered it. He knows that servants refuse to go near the second floor after dark unless ordered, and even then they go in pairs. He knows that more than once he has heard the faint ring of a bell in the servants' quarters when the cords upstairs were still. Robert doesn't know any of this. His friends don't either. They think they're testing a harmless ghost story, the kind you polish up and tell over drinks years later. A dare to add to a collection of foolish, youthful exploits. We reading this now know better. We know that when Charles sets that iron key on the table, he's not just participating in a wager. He's handing a man a direct line to something he doesn't understand, something already restless behind a locked door. The silence that falls after the key changes hands is thick enough to taste. It feels in my mind exactly the way it feels in my apartment, when the AC goes dead and the fridge cuts out, and for a moment, there is nothing but the thin metallic ring of some tiny sound I can't place. They don't hear a bell in that dining room. Not yet, but upstairs in the dark second-floor bedroom, I can't help imagining a draft stirring heavy curtains, a bed waiting, a length of red cord hanging from the ceiling still and innocent. For the last time. By the time they climbed the stairs, the club felt like another world entirely. I see it like this. The dining room empties in a shuffle of chair legs and nervous jokes, and the little procession forms almost without anyone saying, "Let's go." Robert goes first, of course the key heavy in his pocket. His friends fall in behind him, and Charles brings up the rear, pausing only long enough to pinch out a candle on the sideboard. The hallway outside the dining room is narrow, lined with dark wood that swallows the light from the lamps. At the end of it, the staircase snakes upward, steep and mean. The runner on the steps is worn in the middle from years of feet pattern, faded to a ghost of itself. The first step creaks when Robert puts his weight on it. Not a loud, spooky creak, just a tired complaint wood talking to wood. The kind of sound any old house makes. But in that moment, with everyone keyed up and holding their breath, it lands harder. His hand slides along the banister as he climbs. It's smooth from generations of hands before his polished darker, where fingers naturally fall. When I picture that hand now, I can't help thinking about the last thing it will hold. The others follow boots, thudding the cadence just a little off, because no one wants to walk in perfect time with anyone else. Charles's steps are so soft, they barely register, but the air around him feels tight with reluctance. A gas sconce is fixed to the wall halfway up the staircase. The flame inside it hiccups as they pass, banging gently against the glass, then steadies. The light it throws is uneven, making the shadows on the steps jump and twitch. As they reach the top of the stairs, the air feels colder. Houses do that, heat rises, but so does draft. The landing up there is narrower than the space downstairs, more utilitarian. No portraits, no decorative tables, just walls, doors, and the faint, sharp smell of old dust. The hallway to the second-floor bedroom runs straight ahead. The floorboards here are slightly warped. The house itself has settled over the years, and the boards have bowed accordingly. Every step produces a hollow knock, a small muted thump that makes it sound like they're walking over a drum. Robert leads them down the hall. Behind him, one of his friends mutters a curse under his breath as his heel finds a particularly loose plank that dips and pops back, echoing faintly under the other's feet. Near the end of the hallway, a single candle burns in a wall bracket. The flame leans sideways, though the windows on this floor are shut, pulled by a draft that sneaks out through the cracks around the bedroom door. The wax has dripped down the side and hardened in uneven ridges, frozen in mid-slide. The door itself is unremarkable. Painted wood, plain paneling, iron latch. If you didn't know its reputation, you wouldn't give it a second glance, and yet none of the men crowd too close. They form a loose, uneven half-circle a few feet back, as if there's an invisible line on the floor they don't want to cross. Jokes that came easy downstairs die on their tongues up here. Even breathing sounds too loud. I can almost hear it, their hearts thudding behind ribs, the rustle of fabric as someone shifts their weight from one leg to the other, a throat being cleared, and then immediately regretted. Robert stops directly in front of the door. For the first time all evening, his posture changes. The carefree, swaggering looseness pulls tight. His shoulders square, his back straightens like he's about to step into actual combat, instead of a privately owned bedroom. He slips a hand into his pocket and pulls out the key. In the dim gaslight, the iron looks darker than it did downstairs, its edges catching little glints of yellow. The whole hallway seems to narrow down to the space between the key and the lock. He fits the key into the keyhole. The metal-on-metal sound of it sliding in is small, but sharp, a distinct intrusion in the padded silence. It scrapes as he pushes a lining with old tumblers that haven't turned many times in the last decade. For a moment, he doesn't move. The key just sits there halfway in the handle, resting against his fingers. You'd like to think he hesitated, reconsidered, heard something scratching faintly on the other side of the door. He didn't. He turns the key slowly. The lock gives a reluctant series of clicks, each one mechanical and final. To the men behind him, it sounds too loud, like someone working the action of a pistol in an empty church. They all tense muscles, coiling for some dramatic reaction. An inhuman scream, a rush of cold air, the lights snuffing out at once. This is the moment in the ghost story where the world is supposed to answer. Nothing happens. The candle in the wall burns steadily flame, swaying only slightly in the draft. The gas sconce at the top of the stairs continues its soft hiss. The only sound is the echo of their own expectation fading. Robert exhales a short huff that's half laugh, half release of tension. He wraps his fingers around the latch, pushes it down. The door opens inward with a quiet sigh, old hinges moving more smoothly than they have any right to. A faint smell leaks out, dust, old wood polish, stale fabric, dry and oddly flat, like a closet that hasn't been opened in years, even though technically this room is still part of a lived-in house. No shriek, no rush of freezing air, no visible thing crawling on the ceiling. From where his friends stand in the hallway, they can see only a slice of the room beyond the edge of a rug, part of a bed leg, the corner of a dresser. It looks like any other bedroom in any other respectable townhouse. That's almost worse, because if there were blood on the walls, if there were claw marks, if there were any obvious sign of wrongness, they could say, "Ah, there, that's it. That's what we fear." Instead, they're staring into something that looks almost insultingly normal. "See," Robert says over his shoulder, voice light again. "Just a room." The key remains in the lock on the inside as he steps over the threshold, boots shifting from bare floorboards to the edge of a thick rug. The others hang back unconsciously, crowding closer together, as if the space behind them has shrunk. From the doorway, the room waits its details, still soft at the edges. He's in. The dare is real now, and for the first time, the house seems to be paying attention. I need you to see this room the way I do now, after staring at descriptions of it for months. Not as the haunted heartbeat of a legend, but as a physical place. Boards, fabric, plaster, dust. A space you could walk into and touch. The bedroom is not large by modern standards, but for 1840 it's generous. The ceiling is high enough that the gaslight on the wall throws shadows that stretch and bend strangely, leaving the upper corners dim. Directly opposite the door stands a four-poster bed. The posts are dark wood carved with spiraling grooves, the tops adorned with simple finials. Heavy curtains hang down from a frame above, drawn back, at the moment tied with faded cords, so the bed itself is exposed, mattress sheets, blanket folded at the foot. The linens are clean, but not fresh. They've been laundered and made up, but the room hasn't been slept in regularly for a long time. There's a certain stiffness to the way the covers lie, as if they're not used to the weight of a human body. To the right of the bed against the wall stands a wooden dresser. Its surface is polished but scuffed at the corners, the drawers fitted with brass pulls dulled by fingerprints and time. Above it hangs a round mirror in a simple frame. From the hallway in that first moment, The mirror catches a slice of light from the candle outside the door. The reflection shows a distorted sliver of hallway, a hint of Robert's shoulder, the shapes of his friends crowded behind him. As he steps further in, and the angle changes, the mirror begins to hold only the room itself, and eventually only him. The walls are papered in a pattern of climbing vines and small flowers, a design that was probably fashionable when it went up. Now the colors have sunk back greens, going gray petals faded to the soft suggestion of red, like dried blood viewed through a veil. In a few places near the ceiling, the paper has bubbled slightly trapped air, pushing up under the paste. If you stare at the pattern too long, it starts to feel like the vines are moving, creeping out of the corners, winding their way toward the bed. The floor is mostly covered by a thick rug, its pattern less distinct than the wallpapers worn down by years of feet that no longer walk there. The rug muffles sound. When Robert moves further into the room, the solid tap of his boots on the floorboards becomes a softer, barely there thud. That's one of the first wrong notes, the way the room eats sound. Outside in the hallway, every step, every cough, every whisper rebounds in the narrow space. Inside the bedroom, voices seem to drop a register. The air feels heavier, as if it's full of something you can't see, but your lungs have to work around. There's another small chair near the window, its cushion slightly indented, as if someone sat there regularly, once upon a time, staring out at the square. The curtains draped over the window itself are drawn halfway, letting in only a smear of light from the street lamps and whatever moon might be out. From this angle, the panes show more of their own reflection than the outside world. All of that would be utterly unremarkable in any other house. It would be the kind of room you'd nod at, say, nice, and forget 5 minutes later. But then there's the thing hanging over the bed. From the ceiling right above, where a person's head would be when they're lying down, a cord descends. It's red, or it was once. The color has dulled to a dark wine shade, but you can tell it was meant to stand out against the pale ceiling. The cord itself is thick enough to wrap your fist around, braided tight. At the bottom, the strands fray out slightly from years of fingers grabbing, pulling. That's the bell cord. The physical end of the line that runs through the guts of the house down to the servants' quarters, where it connects to a small brass bell with a tiny label. When the door first opens, the cord hangs perfectly still. But as the air in the room shifts, new breath, new bodies, cold hallway air spilling in, it begins to sway. Not dramatically. Just a faint, almost imperceptible movement, a soft, lazy slide from side to side. If you're already nervous, that little sway is enough to make your heart misfire. It looks like something invisible has just brushed past it. Robert notices it, of course. He's standing there with his lamp held up, the light catching the fibers of the cord, picking out a worn patch just above the frayed end, where a hand has gripped most often. Behind him, his friends linger at the threshold, unwilling to step onto the rug. Their shoes stay on the bare strip of floorboard just inside the door. They huddle their faces pale in the lamplight, trying to pretend they're simply being polite about not intruding. Charles stands a little apart from them, still technically in the hallway, as if he's drawing a clear line between himself and the interior. His hand rests on the doorframe, fingers pressed into the wood. "Sir Robert," he says quietly. "Last chance." Robert glances back, eyebrows lifting at the somber tone. "What you expect me to faint at the sight of a bed," he says. "It's a fine room. Better than some I've had." His words land flat. The room swallows them too. Charles's gaze flicks to the cord, then back to Robert's face. "If anything unusual happens," he says, choosing his words carefully, "you are to pull that. Hard. Do you understand? We will be waiting below. Someone will come." His eyes say, "If you live long enough to reach it." Robert looks up at the cord again, then back at Charles. He grins, that same reckless, boyish grin that's carried him through every bad idea so far. "If the monster comes, I'll be sure to ring for it," a servant, he says. "Maybe it just needs a fresh blanket." One of his friends laughs high and thin. Another swallows audibly. Charles doesn't smile. He reaches out suddenly and grabs Robert by the wrist fingers closing around his skin with surprising strength. There's a long, uncomfortable second where neither of them moves. The lamp flame flickers, the cord gives another little sway, the house seems to lean in to listen. "Please," Charles says softly, low enough that the others barely hear it. "Do not treat this as a joke. You do not know this house as I do." Robert hesitates then. Just a flicker. Not enough to pull back, but enough for some of the shine to leave his eyes. It's gone a heartbeat later. He gently disengages his wrist, pats Charles on the shoulder as if to comfort him. "If I run screaming down your stairs before dawn, you can call me a coward to everyone we know," he says. "Until then, consider your reputation safe." He steps fully into the room. The others stay exactly where they are. Not one foot crosses the line where rug meets floorboard. He walks over to the bed, sets his lamp on the small table beside it. The light throws a circle on the wall, climbing up over the headboard across the wallpaper vines, up toward the ceiling and the cord. From the doorway, his friends watch him shrug off his coat, remove his boots, place his pistol on the table within arm's reach of the bed. The whole time no one says out loud the thing they're all thinking, that this could be the last time they see him standing. "Gentlemen," he says, making a little mock bow in their direction. "I will see you at breakfast. Try not to lose too much money between now and then." The attempt at levity lands halfway. A couple of them manage half smiles. One can't meet his eyes at all. Charles reaches for the door. As it swings inward toward the hallway, air from the room washes over them, dry, faintly stale, with a hint of something they can't identify. Not rot, not perfume. Just an absence of the usual household smells. Robert moves to the inside of the door, fingers on the key. "Good night," he says. "Good night," they echo, some voices stronger than others. The door closes. The edges meet the frame with a soft clack. There's a pause, like the house is waiting to see if they'll open it again. Then, from the other side, the small, distinct sound of the key turning in the lock. Click. The men in the hallway hear it clearly. It feels final in a way none of them are willing to name. For a moment, no one moves. Then Charles exhales a breath he might not have realized he was holding. The sound is almost a sigh, almost a prayer. The candle in the wall bracket steadies. The draft quiets, and the whole house seems to exhale with him. Charles insists they don't linger on the landing. There's nothing any of them can do for Robert now that will not involve breaking down the door, and that would defeat the entire purpose of the bet. So he turns away from the locked bedroom, face pale but composed, and leads them back down the hallway. The warped floorboards give their little hollow knocks underfoot again, like muted, disapproving applause. Down the stairs, they go past the sputtering gas sconce through the narrow entry hall. The sounds here are clearer, the clock still ticking, the faint hiss of the coal fire, someone's loose button tapping lightly against a waistcoat with each step. But instead of returning to the polished comfort of the dining room, Charles takes them further back. The transformation is gradual. The molding on the walls becomes less ornate. The paper changes to plain paint. The carpet gives way to bare boards. The smell shifts from polish and brandy to something more honest, soap starch, hot metal, damp cloth drying. They pass a narrow doorway that looks into a small kitchen, where a wood stove sits, its door ajar, the coals inside glowing a soft, dying orange. The metal ticks as it cools, contracting in the night air. A pot sits on a side table, steam long since gone. Past that, the ceiling lowers. The corridor tightens. The air feels more crowded, even though fewer people move through here. This is the servants' space, the part of the house that keeps everything else running and is not meant to be seen by guests. The servants' quarters themselves are cramped and low. Several narrow beds line the walls, each with a thin mattress and a folded wool blanket at the foot. A line is strung diagonally across the room, damp shirts and aprons clipped to it, with wooden pegs still carrying the faint, clean bite of soap. The floor here is scuffed bare, no rugs to soften steps. Every footfall sounds. On the far wall above the beds is the thing Charles wants them to see. A horizontal row of small brass bells, each mounted on a curved piece of metal attached to a wooden board. Above each bell is a tiny card with neat handwriting. Parlor, front room, study, master's room, and so on. It's a simple system, a pull on a cord upstairs, tugs on wire inside the walls, jerks the metal strip down here, and makes the bell twitch and ring. The servant sees which bell is moving, reads the label, and goes to that room. This is the nervous system of the house. One of Robert's friends moves closer, fascinated, reaching up, as if to touch one of the bells. Charles stops him with a small shake of the head. "Please," he says. "They are sensitive. We must not disturb them without cause." There's dust on the upper sides of the bells where no one's fingers ever go, but the undersides shine a little from years of tiny vibrations. You can tell which rooms are most used by the slight unevenness of the polish. Charles steps closer and points to one bell near the center of the row. Its label reads simply, "Upper Bedroom." "Here," he says. "This is the one." The men look at it as though it might jump on its own. It's perfectly still, a small brass dome with a little clapper inside the iron arm holding it poised. At any time during the night, Charles continues if Sir Robert feels uneasy. He has only to pull the cord above the bed. That will set this bell ringing. 3 of us, he nods toward the group, will remain awake in this room at all times. If we hear it, we go up. Immediately. 3, one of them repeats, perhaps thinking of the others who will be allowed to sleep safe in their beds. "Yes," Charles says. "We will take it in turns, if you wish." He reaches up with one finger and very gently pulls down the metal strip above the labeled bell, just enough to make it move. The bell gives a light, clear ping, a sweet high note that hangs in the air just a second longer than it should. It's not loud. In the dead of night, though, in a quiet room, it would sound like a shout. He lets go. The bell shivers once more, then stills. He repeats the motion on another bell, one labeled Parlor. The note it makes is slightly lower. Another study higher. Each bell has its own voice. It's almost pretty in a mechanical, precise way. "It is important that we listen," Charles says. "You must not assume you will just hear it while you drink and talk. We will keep the room as quiet as possible." They nod, expressions tight. No one reaches for cards or a bottle yet. They all keep their eyes on the row of bells, as if the very act of looking will keep them from moving. Eventually, someone suggests a table. A small one is dragged in from the corridor, its legs scraping on the bare floor. The sound is jarring, a harsh reminder of the ordinary world intruding on this thin nerve center of the house. They set it beneath the row of bells. A weak oil lamp is placed at the center, its wick turned down to save fuel. The light it throws is dim, pooling directly under it, and leaving the corners of the room in shadow. The men sit on stools and the edges of beds, dealing cards with hands that aren't quite steady, cups of tea appearing from the kitchen as the last of the stove heat is used. Their laughter, when it comes, is strained, the volume turned down, their glances forever sliding back up to that one bell in the middle. From where I sit in my time imagining them there, It feels almost like watching surgeons monitor a patient's vital signs. That row of bells is their heart monitor. If upper bedroom starts to convulse, something upstairs has gone terribly wrong. There's something I know about that bell that none of the men in that small, cramped room know. It's in a different kind of document, not an official report, not a gentleman's letter, but a fragment of testimony dictated by a housemaid who never learned to write well. Her words were written down by someone else in clumsy spelling and odd phrasing, then tucked into a file marked with the house's address. She talks about an afternoon months before this night, about being in these same quarters folding linens still warm from the line when the bell labeled upper bedroom began to ring. Not a light chime, not a polite request. Wild. It shook so hard, the metal strip above it bowed. The sound filled the whole room, shrill and continuous, a metallic scream. She says she dropped the linens and yelled for the other servant on duty. Together they stared at the bell, then at each other. Neither of them had seen Mr. Benson or any guest go upstairs. They hadn't heard footsteps. They hadn't heard the bedroom door open. Still, the bell rang and rang as if someone was hanging on the cord with both hands. They froze. Long enough, she says, that she felt ashamed later. But in the moment, her legs wouldn't move. It was Mr. Benson himself who stormed in furious at the noise, demanding to know who was playing at foolishness. When he saw the bell still convulsing, his anger drained away. "Who is in the upper bedroom?" he demanded. "No one, sir," they said. "It's locked, sir. You have the only key." The ringing stopped then. Just ceased. Silence fell so suddenly it made everyone flinch. He went upstairs immediately, key in hand. They crept after him far enough to see him put the key into the lock, hear it turn. The door opened. The room beyond was as empty as ever. No guest, no servant. But the bed had shifted several inches from the wall, heavy casters leaving fresh grooves in the rug. One of the curtains was swaying slowly, as if someone had just brushed past it. A drawer in the dresser hung open a finger's width. He shut the door again, locked it, came back down with his mouth set in a hard line. "None of you," he said, "will ever speak of this." That command held mostly. It didn't make it into the official narratives, but secrets are never perfect. Pieces leak. The men gathered under the bells tonight don't know any of this. For them, upper bedroom is just a label, a convenient signal. They think that if it rings, it will mean one thing: their friend has pulled a cord because he is frightened or in trouble. We know it can mean something else. We know that in this house, bells don't always need a human hand to move them. It's funny how fast a house can shrink. Down in the servants' quarters, under that low ceiling with the laundry line sagging above their heads, the men who sent Robert upstairs sit around a small table like schoolboys caught out after curfew. The row of bells hangs above them on the far wall, the one marked upper bedroom, still and silent. Everything in the room seems arranged around that one small piece of brass, as if the table, the beds, even the stove were placed to give it the best possible view. At first they try to pretend this is just another late night. Someone shuffles a deck of cards a little too loudly, the rough, dry sound cutting through the quiet. Another pours tea from a battered pot, the liquid glugging out and splashing against the sides of chipped cups. They make a few half-hearted jokes about whose luck will be worst, whose wife will be angriest when they stagger home at dawn. The laughter that follows is muted, drifting up only a few inches before the heavy air swallows it. There is a clock on a small shelf by the door, not nearly as grand as the one in the main hall, but its tick is just as relentless. At 10:15 p.m., one of them checks it and says he'll be taking his boots off about now. There's a tiny beat where everyone pictures Robert upstairs alone, crossing that thick rug, his pistol on the bedside table, that red cord hanging above him like a noose that hasn't decided what it wants yet. The cards make their slow circuit deal, glance at the bells, discard, glance at the bells, collect the trick, glance at the bells. The rhythm is hypnotic, but no one is really paying attention to the game. Their eyes keep drifting back to that one spot on the wall. The wood stove in the little kitchen area has burned down to embers. The iron body ticks and pings softly as it cools, each metallic contraction a tiny random punctuation mark. Somewhere above in the bones of the house, wood pops gently in response to shifting temperatures. It's not loud enough to startle, just enough to remind them that they are in something alive. Not in the flesh and blood sense, but in the way old buildings remember every sound ever made inside them. They keep their voices low without discussing it. No one says we should be quiet, but they are. Anything louder than a murmur feels like a challenge, like they're daring the house to answer. At 11:02 p.m., the man closest to the clock clears his throat and announces the time, though no one asked. His voice comes out hoarse. He lifts his cup, finds it empty, and sets it back down too carefully. By now, the air in the servants' quarters is stale from their breathing and the remnants of heat from the stove. The smell of soap from the damp clothes mingles with sweat and tea and the faint ghost of coal smoke from the chimney. These are the smells of people waiting in a cheap, cramped place, while something expensive and dangerous happens above their heads. The bells catch every tremor in the room. When someone shifts in his seat, the floorboards under the bed nearest the wall creak, sending a subtle vibration through the boards and into the frame that holds the brass. The bells shiver almost imperceptibly, not enough to ring, but enough to remind everyone they could. "Do you suppose he's asleep?" one of the men asks at last, staring into his cards as if the answer might be written there. "Not likely," another says. "He's probably pacing, poking under the bed for phantoms." "He'll be bored out of his skull," says a third, trying for bravado. "And we'll be sick to death of staring at these damned bells before midnight." No one laughs this time. The hours stretch. They play hand after hand, the pile of coins in the middle of the table swelling and shrinking, but nobody really cares who's winning. One man keeps rubbing the back of his neck, fingers kneading the same spot. Another has started tapping his foot under the table, a restless staccato that stops every time someone glares at him. The quiet is not complete. It's made up of tiny layered sounds, the clock's insistent tick, the occasional drip from a pipe in the wall, the subtle swish of a sleeve brushing the rough wood of the table as someone shifts. Every time a card smacks the tabletop, it seems too loud. Down here, they are waiting for something very specific to happen. A bell, a ring. A clear sign that the man upstairs has tugged the cord and pulled the attention of the house down to this cramped little room. The strange thing is, as I trace their night from the safe distance of a century and a half, I realize I know that feeling exactly. I have my own version of the servants' quarters, my living room, my cheap desk, my row of notifications lined up in the corner of my laptop screen. It's 11:47 p.m. in my world when I pause writing and notice how quiet my apartment has become. My upstairs neighbor's TV, which has been leaking low dialogue and canned laughter through the ceiling for hours, clicks off. The sudden lack of murmur makes my ears ring. The AC unit in my wall does its usual rattle then thump routine and falls silent, leaving the room with nothing but the far-off growl of the highway and the tiny electric buzz of my monitor. Out in the hallway, the building's motion-activated light flicks on with a soft, plasticky click, triggered by someone walking past. A shadow slides briefly under my door, then moves on. The elevator dings once doors opening with a glide I can't see. Then it dings again as the doors close. I don't know what I'm waiting for exactly. The bell, maybe. The one I heard that first night, a small metallic ting behind my wall, As I sit there, fingers hovering over the keyboard, I find myself holding my breath, straining to hear something that I'm not even sure I want to hear. Back in 1840, under the row of bells, one of Robert's friends feels the same pressure building in his chest. Not fear, not yet. Just that taut sensation of being on the brink of something you can't quite name, convinced that if you blink at the wrong moment, you'll miss it. He looks up at the clock. 11:47 p.m., by their reckoning as well. Almost midnight. He'll be laughing at us, someone mutters, forcing a smile, snoring away while we sit here like nervous nannies listening for the baby to cry. But the joke doesn't land, because under the table hands are clenched just a little too tight. Throats are too dry. Ears are tuned so finely to the possibility of a single bell note that the world has narrowed to that expectation. It's the quiet before a storm that might not come, the long intake of breath before someone screams or doesn't. They don't know which would be worse if the bell never rings, leaving them with nothing but their imaginations, or if it does. In my apartment, I exhale slowly, realize I've been reading the same sentence of an old letter over and over without absorbing the words. I save my draft, the tiny ping of the computer's confirmation box, too bright in the stillness. I think not for the first time that there's a parallel line running between their night and mine, two groups of people in different centuries, sitting awake past the time they should be in bed, waiting for a sound that will change the way they sleep forever. The tension in both places is low but constant. A hum under the skin. Nobody has screamed yet. No bells are moving. But the sense that they might at any second is enough to keep everyone awake. In the servants' quarters, someone deals another hand, fingers trembling just enough to scatter the cards. In my apartment, I place my hands back on the keyboard and decide it's time to push the story forward. Because the longest hours of the night are almost over. And what comes next is not quiet. There's a strange, weightless second in every card game where nothing has happened. Yet the card is still in the dealer's hand, the bet hasn't been spoken. Everyone is mid-inhale. That's where they are when the night tears in half. One man is halfway through laying a card on the table. Another is just drawing a breath to say, "I'll raise the stove ticks as it cools." The clock on the shelf does its proper unhurried tick. Tick. And then a scream rips straight down through the floorboards. It doesn't seep through timidly or arrive as a vague, muffled shape they can pretend is anything else. It hits the servants' quarters like a blade high full stretched past what feels human. The sound seems to start everywhere at once, above their heads, in the wood under their boots, inside their teeth. For a heartbeat, their brains just blank. There's no neat label for this, no category that contains it safely. Then their bodies react. The man with the card drops it. Another kicks his chair backward as he bolts upright, the legs screeching on the floor. Someone's cup goes over tea, sloshing across the table in a dark smear. A curse cracks the air. God! The scream keeps going higher, fraying at the edges, as if it's being dragged out of a throat that doesn't want to give it up. It climbs towards some unbearable peak, and then another sound crashes into it. Robert's bell explodes into life. Earlier, when Charles had demonstrated the bell system, the little brass domes had chimed politely under his touch. A dainty ting like a teaspoon tapped against a glass. An elegant little signal from one room to another. This isn't that. The bell-marked upper bedroom hurls itself into motion. The metal strip above it jerks so violently that it slams against the wooden backboard again and again, knocking dust loose in thin gray puffs. The bell's clapper smashes the inside of the dome in a blur, hitting so fast, the individual rings fuse into a single razor-bright shriek. Metal is smashing metal sharp and relentless over and over, filling every inch of the small room. It's too loud for its size, too vicious for its purpose. This was supposed to be a call for tea, for help with a coat, for a servant to stir the fire. Right now it sounds like the skeleton of the house itself is screaming. The bell's sound drills into their skulls, into their nerves, into that primal part of the body that doesn't care about dignity or disbelief, only about running. Robert, one of them, yells, voice cracking. It's pure reflex. The rational part of him knows the man upstairs can't hear him through a ceiling and a closed door and all that sound, but the name tears itself out anyway. Robert. Another shouts, he's ringing, as if anyone in the room could have missed it. They move all at once. Chairs go over. The table shudders. Coins scatter and roll, chiming dully against each other, small echoes of the bigger, crueler ringing above. Someone's knee bangs into the bed frame. Someone else treads hard on another's foot. For a second, their one panicked tangle of boots and elbows and grabbed coats, the room suddenly far too small for this much fear. The corridor outside the servants' quarters is narrow enough when they're calm. In their rush, it might as well be a crack between stones. They shove and squeeze and swear, shoulders colliding with plaster hands, slapping the walls for balance. Behind them, the bell keeps screaming. It doesn't sound like it's being rung anymore. It sounds like it's being shaken, throttled, its small brass body forced into motion by someone pulling the cord upstairs as hard and fast as they can. There's a harsh metallic grinding underneath the main shriek now, hardware straining in the wall, mounting brackets, protesting. Their boot steps slam into the corridor floorboards, a pounding that reverberates up the walls. Every step feels like it should knock the sound out of the bell by sheer impact, but it doesn't. The bell keeps up its furious, breathless clamor as if it's trying to outrun them. The house changes around them. Moments ago, it was a collection of quiet rooms and dim hallways, all their sounds muffled and respectable. Now every surface has become an instrument. The thin runner on the stairs does nothing to muffle their weight. Boards groan and clack under each footfall. A picture frame rattles against the wall as they rush past. Somewhere deeper inside, a long, low beam gives a complaining creak, the noise sliding through the structure like a distant growl. As they hit the main staircase, the scream from above twists, breaks, and stops cut off mid-note like a hand clamped over a mouth. The bell does not stop. A few steps up, and the sound from the servants' wall is no longer just heard, it's felt. The violent rattling transmits itself into the banister, into the newel post, into the very boards under their boots. The bell is downstairs physically, but the panic it communicates is everywhere at once. Move, someone shouts, though everyone is already going as fast as they can. Their boots hammer against the stair treads. The grandfather clock in the main hall ticks on, absurdly calm, its pendulum, swinging in slow arcs that don't care about human emergencies. For a moment, the bells shriek and the clocks tick, occupy the same air, frantic, endless, and slow, steady, indifferent. Somewhere above them, above the shrilling bell, above the timbered ceiling of the hall, above their pounding feet, another sound slams into the night. Something heavy hits the floor on the second story. It's not just a dropped item. The impact is deep, solid, full-bodied. The kind of sound that makes dust shake loose from unseen rafters, that sends a shiver through plaster, that jolts birds awake in the eaves. Whoomp. The boards under their feet answer with a faint aftershock. One of the men stumbles as if he's been shoved. The hand on the railing slips, fingers scraping varnish. In the servants' quarters, the bell must still be tearing at the wall. None of them can hear it clearly now, not through their own breath and the slap of their hearts in their ears, but they know by the way their veins are buzzing that it hasn't stopped. I know that sound so well now that I can almost hear it overlapping with my own world. As I sit here telling you this, my fingers are tight around the edge of my desk knuckles, whitening the way theirs did around the banister. My breathing picks up in time with theirs. In my headphones, there's only my voice, but in my memory layered on top, there is that relentless, bright, metallic chaos. I picture them climbing the gaslight above, flickering as their bodies rush past, throwing shadows that lurch and stretch along the walls. I picture the dust in the stairwell air stirred by their movement, catching that light in quick, tiny flashes like the specks inside a shaken snow globe. The house is no longer just a building to them or to me. It's a throat, and something inside it is screaming. They reach the final turn in the staircase. The second-floor landing is just beyond. The bell, which had seemed deafening a moment before, is now muffled by distance, a metallic hysteria beating faintly through wood and plaster. And then, just as their hands reach for the last stretch of banister, the bell stops. Silence slams down like a door. Not real silence, of course. There is still the sound of their boots on the stairs, the gas flame trembling, someone gasping for breath. But compared to what was there a second ago, it feels absolute. The fine hairs on their arms and necks bristle in the sudden void. Their ears ring with the ghost of that shriek. They hit the landing and stare down the short hallway that leads to the upper bedroom. At the far end, the door waits. Closed. No scream. No bell. No sound at all from behind that wood. Every muscle in their bodies wants to keep moving to charge the length of the hall and hit that door like a battering ram. Another older instinct, the one that remembers caves and predators and firelight whispers, that maybe it's better not to find out what's on the other side. The house, for the first time in a long time, is perfectly still. And in that stillness, the echo of the bell lingers not in the air, but in them. They don't know it yet, but the worst sound of the night hasn't happened. It's waiting for them at the end of that hallway, on the other side of that door, in the single crack of a pistol that will make all this ringing feel like a warning no one understood in time. For a few seconds on that landing, all the noise they've kicked up chasing the bell has nowhere to go. It crashes around inside their bodies instead. Their lungs are working like they've run miles, air dragging in and out in jagged pulls, but the house itself has gone dead still. The bell has fallen silent. The scream is gone. The only sound left in the world is the scrape of their boots and the thud of their own hearts pounding in their ears. The second-floor corridor stretches out in front of them, narrow, close-walled gaslight, breathing faintly at each end. The wallpaper here is a polite pattern of vines and flowers, but in this light, it just looks like something creeping along the walls. At the far end, the bedroom door waits. The one with the keyhole that swallowed Robert and the night. From this angle, the keyhole is just a dark bruise in the wood. No glint of metal inside. No sign of movement beyond. The paneling around it looks more ordinary than it has any right to. Somehow, that's worse than if it were scorched or bleeding. For a moment, none of them can make their mouths work. They stand there, chests heaving, sweat starting to chill under their collars, and stare at that stretch of wood, like it might decide on its own to open and tell them what it's done. Then one of them manages to say it. Robert, his voice comes out too small, swallowed by the corridor. It doesn't sound like the confident man who urged Robert into this adventure earlier in the evening. It sounds like a child waking up from a nightmare and calling for a brother who is not coming. Another man adds his own louder. Robert, answer us. Nothing comes back. No footsteps, no curse, no nervous laugh telling them it was all a joke, that he'd tugged the cord and screamed just to see how fast they would run. The house seems to lean forward around them, listening. The air in the corridor thickens, as if they're breathing through felt. Even the gaslight near the bedroom door steadies its flame, narrowing and drawing in, as if it too is holding its breath. They move down the hall. Each step is cautious now, in spite of the panic. The floorboards give tiny, suspicious whispers under their weight. The closer they get to the door, the more their bodies tighten some primitive part of their brains, bracing for something. A roar, a shape, another scream. Robert, one of them, tries again. "We're here. Open the door, man." They're close enough now to see the tiny scratches near the latch, the places where decades of hands have missed the handle and scraped the wood instead. The key is still on the inside. They can tell by the angle of the slot in the keyhole, dark, unbroken. There is a fraction of a second right as the nearest man reaches out, intention gathering in his shoulders, to pound on the panels where everything aligns. The night outside the house. The men in the hall. The man on the bed in the room beyond. The thing in the room with him. And then the final sound arrives. The gunshot cracks through the door like a fist through glass. It's so loud at that distance that it doesn't feel like sound. At first it feels like pressure, a sudden brutal slap of air that punches their eardrums inward and vibrates in the cavities of their chests. Flame doesn't come through the keyhole, but dust does. The impact shakes the whole frame. A fine cloud of plaster and ancient dust sifts down from the jamb, from the hairline gap between door and lintel, drifting for a heartbeat in front of their stunned faces. The gas flame behind them flutters wildly, throwing their shadows into brief, mad contortions on the wall. One of them drops to a half-crouch, automatically hands coming up, as if he expects bullets to follow. Another stumbles back against the wallpaper heart, stuttering hard enough that he thinks for a terrifying moment it might stop altogether. Their ears ring. The echo of the shot seems to ricochet back and forth in the narrow hall, bouncing from panel to panel, dragging a thin metallic whine behind it. For a breath or two, none of them can hear their own voices under that internal roar. Then, as the echo dies, reality slams in. Robert, they are at the door in a rush now, all hesitation burned away by the knowledge that whatever just happened in that room isn't abstract anymore. It isn't a scream or a bell or a story told in a club. It's gunpowder and lead and the finality that comes with them. They hammer on the panels with fists and the sides of their hands. The door shudders in its frame, giving back dull, hollow thuds. "Open up. Do you hear me? Open this door." Of course he doesn't. The key on the inside sits motionless in the lock. The metal doesn't jingle, doesn't turn. The keyhole stays a black, unblinking eye. Panic sharpens. They look at each other and see their own fear reflected back, sweat at the temples' teeth, bared not in aggression, but in strain, eyes too white in the gaslight. Someone swears he heard something else in there after the gunshot. A soft, strangled sound, like the last air leaving a body, but it was buried so deep under the shock that he can't be sure. "Stand back," one of them snaps. Voice gone hoarse but decisive. We break it. They don't bother arguing. The first kick lands just beside the latch. The boot heel connects with a crack of leather on wood that travels up the kicker's leg and bruises his bones. The door holds. The old oak absorbs the impact and gives only a small complaint, the frame creaking faintly. Again. This time, two of them go at once, one shoulder, one boot. The door groans. The latch rattles. Inside the lock, the key trembles in its slot, but does not fall. Splinters pop from the jamb and scatter onto the runner. They are shouting now without really hearing themselves, names and curses and prayers all tangled together. Another shoulder slam. Another kick lower, closer to the lock. The wood is giving their fibers, stretching nails, working loose in their holes. The house is noisy again for a few seconds, their impacts, the gaslight's frantic hiss, the faint clatter of something small, dislodged and rolling down the hall. The silence after the gunshot begins to fracture. Then, with a sound that is almost a scream in itself, the door frame finally splinters. The latch rips free of cracked wood, tearing a jagged notch. The door jerks inward and then swings banging against the inside wall with a heavy, dull thud that sounds wrong in a way none of them will ever be able to explain. The room beyond is suddenly terribly open. Later, when I'm sitting in an archive reading room a century and a half away, I will find 3 or 4 different official accounts of what happens next. They will all agree on the basics: the state of the bed, the cord, the pistol, the way Robert looks. None of them will mention what one of those men swears he saw in the first half second after the door flew inward. He didn't tell the coroner. He couldn't make himself. He only wrote it down once, years later, in a diary no one was meant to read. The ink is faded, the paper brittle, but the line is still there, crammed between more ordinary complaints about weather and politics. As the door burst, I saw with my own eyes a gray formlessness draw itself away from the bed and slip into the corner behind the curtains, like smoke that knows it is being watched. When we entered, it was gone, if indeed it had ever been. In that moment from the threshold, he sees it. Something gray and shapeless clinging to the wall by the head of the bed, sliding sideways with an awful boneless grace. It moves not like a person, not like an animal, but like a shadow peeled loose and trying desperately to find a new surface. It streaks into the far corner, flattening itself between the folds of the heavy curtain and the wall, and then it isn't there at all, only fabric, only pattern, only the faint sway of cloth that should be still in such a closed room. By the time the others stumble fully inside, eyes drawn to the bed and the red cord and the figure lying there, whatever he thought he saw might as well be another trick of the dust and his ruined nerves. He doesn't say it out loud. He lets the official story settle into place: bell scream, gunshot, heart failure. The last recorded sound that anyone admits to hearing from that room is the crack of the pistol. The rest, the small sliding noise of something gray retreating into the corner of the wallpaper. The soft whisper of curtains folding back into place is kept off the record. It lives only in that single cramped line in a forgotten diary, and in whatever still moves sometimes along the walls of the room where a bell once rang itself hoarse. For a moment, when the door slams into the wall and the dust lifts off the floor, nobody moves. They've spent hours imagining what they might find in this room. None of those versions prepared them for the real thing. Sound drains out of the world, in that way it does, after something too loud, too sudden. The echoes of the gunshot are still buzzing in their ears, a thin, high whine under everything, but the room itself is thick with quiet. The only noise any of them are aware of is their own breathing, harsh, ragged, uneven, and the faint hiss of the oil lamp by the bed. They're all standing just inside the doorway, bunched together like they're afraid to step any farther in, as if the wooden boards beyond some invisible line might be different, might belong to the thing that did this. Their eyes catch on the details, first scattered around the room like clues in a puzzle that only wants to hurt you. The red cord is no longer a neat vertical line from ceiling to hand. It's been ripped free from its fixture. Up above in the plaster, where it once fed into the house's hidden veins, there's a cracked, ragged hole, edges chalky and broken. A fragment of the brass fitting dangles crookedly, as if the house tried to hold on to it and failed. The cord itself snakes down in a long, dark curve. Part of it still hangs in the air before trailing across the floor, looping once near the side of the bed, then climbing up over the mattress. It disappears under Robert's clenched fists and reappears beyond his elbow like a dead vein. On the floor near the foot of the bed, the pistol lies on its side. The smell of burned powder still hangs faintly in the air, acrid and metallic, cutting through the old dust and polish. It's fresh enough, that when one of the men inhales, his throat tightens and he coughs the sound shockingly loud in the stillness. The pistol's barrel points toward the far wall. In that wall, a new mark has appeared, a small dark hole surrounded by a spray of pale cracks in the plaster, like a stone thrown into ice. A faint ring of dust has fallen beneath it, disturbed by the impact. All of this, the cord, the gun, the hole, has the simple, brutal logic of physics. Something pulled, something fired, something struck. It's what's on the bed that refuses to be explained. Robert lies on his back atop the covers, as if he'd never managed to get under them. His coat is open shirt, slightly wrinkled around the collar, cravat askew. His boots are off. Someone finds them later, neatly side by side near the foot of the bed, like he took them off intending to rest. His eyes are open. That's the first thing every witness mentions every time. Not the cord, not the gun, not the bullet. The eyes. They're wide in a way. Eyes are not meant to be lids dragged back so far. The skin at the corners looks strained. The whites are marbled with red, delicate veins, burst under pressure. They don't look at the door or any particular point in the room. They look at something that is no longer there, something that once filled his entire field of vision, close enough to crowd out everything else. His jaw is clenched so hard that the muscles stand out in ropes along his neck. His lips are pulled back just enough to show his teeth, not in a grin, not in a snarl, but in that involuntary, awful rictus that happens when every part of a body is bracing against something it can't bear. His hands are locked around the cord, both of them. One near the frayed end fingers, dug so deep into the fibers that the rope has left faint grooves in his skin. The other higher up, grasping a section near the middle as if he'd been hauling on it with everything he had. The tendons along the backs of his hands stand out frozen. One of his friends, the same one who thought he saw the gray shape vanish into the curtains, swears later that as they stand there, he sees Robert's chest twitch. Just the smallest movement, a stutter under the fabric of his shirt, like a breath trying to rise. "Robert," he says, stepping forward, hope shoving fear aside for a split second. "Robert, can you hear me?" He reaches the bed, leans down, and grabs his friend's shoulder. The contact is a shock. He expects warmth, resistance, the subtle give of living muscle. Instead, the body is cold. Not ice cold, not yet, but wrong for a man who was shouting minutes ago. There is no yielding, no slack. Robert is rigid under his hands, every limb locked. When he tries to move one of the fingers gripping the cord, it doesn't budge. The joint is fixed in place, as if the body has decided it will stay exactly as it was in the moment it stopped. He jerks his hand back like he's touched something hot. He's gone, another friend, whispers voice scraping. God help us, he's gone. The guilt doesn't arrive gradually. It hits all at once, a physical blow from inside. They see themselves reflected in his dead, staring eyes, the laughter at the club, the clink of glasses, the daring tone as they said, "If you're so certain, spend a night there." The half-drunken bravado, the thrill of having a story to tell. Every chuckle, every dismissive wave of the hand, every "it's just superstition" gathers into a weight that slams down on their shoulders now. One man finds himself saying, "We should never have," and can't finish the sentence. Another thinks of how loudly he argued for the bet, how he goaded Robert, how he rolled his eyes when Charles tried to warn them. They have no comforting narrative to reach for, no masked intruder to blame, no visible wound to point at and say, "Here, this is what killed him." All they have is a dead man with his hands locked around a cord to a bell that screamed itself hoarse. Outside the house, the square is quiet. The fog muffles the occasional clip-clop of a passing cab. A lamplighter finishes his rounds and goes home, unaware that in one of the tall houses, a circle of men are staring at the consequences of treating a haunting like a party trick. Inside in that second-floor bedroom, the air feels thick, almost used up. The smell of powder and cold sweat and old dust mixes into something unpleasant and hard to name. No one wants to stay in the room any longer than they have to, but none of them wants to be the first to suggest leaving either. It feels wrong to walk away, as if by staying, they might somehow reverse what's happened, or at least make it make sense. It won't. Years later, when I read their testimonies, I realized they all pause at the same detail when they speak just for a heartbeat, just long enough for the clerk's pen to scratch slower across the page. The expression on his face, one of them says, they never quite find the right words for it. Fear is too small a word for whatever tightened every muscle, burst the vessels in his eyes, and clamped his jaw like that. But it's the one the coroner settles on. He will write that Robert Warboy died of heart failure. He will not officially say that he died of fear. But everyone in that room standing by the bed, while the smell of burned powder lingers and the cord dangles from his fists, knows that's what happened. And the worst part for them, and for me, sitting in my own time reading about it, is that they are the ones who dared him to go upstairs in the first place. History doesn't remember the sound of the bell. It remembers the paperwork. The official inquest takes place in a room about as far from the haunted bedroom as you can get, and still be in the same city. No wallpaper vines here, no red cord, no heavy curtains. Just plain walls, a table, and a smell of ink and damp wool from too many coats hung on pegs. I imagine the room from the fragments I've read. A narrow window smeared with city grime lets in a reluctant light. The floorboards are scuffed along the paths people walk most, door to chair to desk, back to door. A coal grate along one wall spits occasional sparks, fighting a losing battle against London's chill. The men present magistrate, coroner, clerks. Witnesses bring their own weather with them: tiredness, curiosity, impatience. None of them wants this to take longer than it has to. On the table, papers are stacked in careful piles. A quill scratches steadily as a clerk notes names, dates, times. The coroner himself sits at the head, a man whose job it is to look for causes where other people see only endings. He's seen bodies in worse condition than Robert's. He's seen violence, disease, decay. That might be why what happened in the bedroom unsettles him more than he shows. They call witnesses one by one. Charles Benson goes first. He's subdued, drawn, his precise manners unraveling at the edges. He speaks of the house, of the room, of the reputation he never wanted but could not shake. He describes the disturbances in cautious, measured language, downplaying anything that can't be explained, emphasizing his reluctance to ever use the room at all. If he mentions the previous incidents, the guest who left half mad the afternoon the bell rang of its own accord, that part never makes it into the neat, official summary. What survives on the page is a much flatter version. Owner states that the upper bedroom has long been avoided due to unpleasant feelings reported by staff and guests. Then the friends. Their testimonies overlap, diverge, overlap again. They sit in different chairs on different days, but their words circle the same images. Robert laughing in the club as the bet was made. The walk into the townhouse. The climb up the narrow stairs. The locked door. They repeat details as if saying them enough times will somehow make the story line up into something rational. The scream, the bell, the gunshot, the cord in his hands, the expression on his face. Every now and then, one of them slips and says something that doesn't make the official cut. A mention of seeing something gray moving in the corner of his eye, maybe. Or the way the room felt crowded as if someone else were standing between the bed and the wall. The clerk's pen hesitates once, twice, then resumes its tidy script, omitting anything that sounds too much like superstition. The coroner asks the practical questions. Was he in good health? Any known heart troubles? Any history of fits or madness? Had he consumed a great deal of drink? The answers are dull and unhelpful. Good health. No prior illness. No obvious intoxication. A robust, energetic gentleman who by all accounts should have walked out of that room in the morning with a new anecdote, not left it on a board with a sheet over his face. They examine the body. They note the rigid limbs, the pallor, the burst vessels in the eyes. They note the absence of external injury beyond a few minor abrasions, where his hands clutched the cord too hard. No stab wounds, no bullet holes in flesh. The bullet from the pistol is found embedded in the wall, cleanly spent. They open him looking for hidden catastrophe, a ruptured vessel, a damaged organ, some internal betrayal that could account for a healthy man dropping dead in the space between one breath and the next. They find a heart that stopped, but not why it stopped. No clots, no obvious defect, no poison. In the end, when all the questions are asked and all the witnesses are sent away to wait in cold hallways and smoke their nerves down in slow-burning cigarettes, the coroner reaches for the only category that fits well enough on paper. I've seen the line in the scan of the report, the letters all stiff and upright, as if they know they're being watched. Cause of death, failure of the heart, sudden under circumstances unknown. Sometimes it appears as massive heart failure under unknown causes. The wording shifts slightly depending on which copy you read, but the meaning is the same. His heart stopped, and we cannot say why. Fear doesn't go into the official record easily. You can't weigh it or measure it or point to it in an organ jar. You can only infer it from the way a man's face looks when he dies. The inquest decides, in effect, that the cause of death was the absence of anything else. No stab wound, no shot, no stroke. Therefore, the engine simply stopped. They don't write about the bell. Not really. It's mentioned in the narrative of the events in the timeline. He entered the room. He had access to the bell cord, the bell rang, and alerted those below. But it's treated as a mechanism, not a symbol. For me, reading those pages under fluorescent lights in the library, the bell is all I can hear. I imagine it ringing as the coroner speaks, a faint, ghostly echo under his measured tone. When they're finished, when the verdict is written and the papers are stacked in their special folder, there's a final, small ceremony. The coroner's seal pressed into heated wax. The stamp of authority, literal and figurative. I like to think about the sound that makes the blunt, final thunk of wood and metal hitting the desk, imprinting the emblem into soft wax. It's a small sound, not nearly as dramatic as a gunshot or a screaming bell, but in its own way, it's just as final. That stamp is the coffin nail on the official story. Sir Robert Warboy died of heart failure. That's the line the world gets. But there's another story running underneath, one you only hear if you listen to the parts that didn't make it into the record. The shaky letters, the whispered recollections, the things people wrote down only when they thought no one important would ever read them. That story has another main character, the Nameless Thing. Here's the part everyone likes to repeat when they tell the story over drinks. The room was never normal. Even before Robert ever crossed its threshold, 50 Berkeley Square had a rumor clinging to it like mold. The official inquest touches it only lightly, but if you dig deeper into private letters, into the kind of local histories that never made it into proper books, you start to see a pattern. The previous owner of the house before Charles had a brother. The records almost never give his name. He appears in phrases like "my unfortunate brother" or "my brother whose condition you know," as if writing the specifics might invite them in. What they do say in polite, horrified Victorian euphemism is that the brother was of violent and deranged temperament. He suffered fits of mania, dark humors, uncontrollable rages, and he was kept for some years in a locked room on the second floor of the house on Berkeley Square. You can picture what that means without anyone spelling it out. The heavy door, the key kept on a separate ring, the servants told never to open it, no matter what they heard. Meals slid inside quickly, eyes averted. The sound of pacing overhead at odd hours, shouting, sometimes laughter, sometimes worse. He died there. Passed away in his chamber, one brief notice says, as if he were a respectable uncle gently expiring in his sleep. But in the margins of another letter, in the cramped, careful handwriting people use when they're saying something they shouldn't, there's a more telling line. The manner of his end was such that I dare not put it plainly. Suffice it to say, he was found in such a posture as to suggest he had struggled against some unseen torment. After that, the room was wrong. People began to hear things from behind the door when no one lived there. Not voices exactly, more like the sound of someone moving in a confined space, a heavier weight crossing the floor, bumping against furniture. A soft, dragging noise along the walls. Once a maid sworn to secrecy said she heard a sound like nails tracing the length of the door from the inside, slow and deliberate. When they did open it, for cleaning, for inspections, when someone insisted on seeing for themselves, the furniture sometimes wasn't where it should be. A chair tilted just off its usual spot, as if someone had been sitting in it and shoved back. The bed slightly skewed, curtains breathing slowly when no window was open. And then there were the sightings. Not everyone saw it. Enough did that the stories overlap. Always at night in the dimmest corner of the room. Always described the same way, not a figure you could sketch, but a grayness that seemed to cling to the wall, darker than the shadows around it. One guest described waking in the half-light of dawn and seeing something like a stain of smoke slide out from under the bed, stretch up along the wall, and flatten itself near the ceiling, as if it were trying to become part of the house. Another said he saw it crawling along the floor like a beast, without limbs, pressing itself into corners, slinking around the base of the bed, in a way that made every instinct in him scream to get up and run, even though his body refused to move. Nobody could agree on its exact shape. They agreed on how it made them feel, an immediate, crushing, bone-deep certainty that they were not meant to be in the same room with it. They started calling it the Nameless Thing. Not a ghost, not a demon. Those words felt too specific, too tied to rules and rituals. This was more like the room itself had grown a tumor in the shape of every bad feeling that had ever soaked into its walls. After Robert's death, the room's reputation hardened. Servants refused to sleep there. Some refused to go up to the second floor at all after dark, even to fetch something quickly. Those who were forced to work near it did so in pairs and never with their backs to the door. Tenants came and went. A few insisted on using the room, usually men who had heard the stories, and scoffed. They never lasted long. Some left abruptly without explanation after a single night. One suffered what the records delicately call a nervous collapse, babbling about bells ringing in the night and hands dragging at his covers. The bell system itself fell out of use as the decades crawled past. Servants became scarcer. New technologies crept in. Modernization doesn't like visible reminders of old hierarchies, and those neat rows of brass bells upstairs and down became embarrassing relics. Eventually, the wires were cut. The bells came down. The holes in ceilings and walls were plastered over. Push buttons and later electric systems took their place, then those too disappeared. The house shifted with the times shedding skin, but the stories didn't stop. In every generation, you can find a new layer of rumor, thin and persistent, wrapped around that second floor. People mention a feeling in that part of the house, a sense of being watched, an unexplained cold patch on the landing. Some of the accounts stray further, not just in dusty letters, but online. I've read glowing real estate listings for Berkeley Square location, prestige, proximity to shops and parks. If you dig further into comment sections and anonymous reviews, you start to see the same pattern emerge, altered slightly for each new era. "Oh, it's a lovely area," someone writes in a forum about London neighborhoods. I worked in an office there for a year. Only thing I didn't like was the weird feeling in our storage room on the second floor of the old Georgian place we rented. Always felt like someone was in there with me when I was filing. On another thread, buried under a question about historic hauntings, there's a throwaway comment from a user with a screen name that doesn't connect to anything else. Used to have a job near Berkeley Square in one of those old townhouses converted into offices. They'd walled off a section of the upper floor ages ago, turned it into a file storage area. No windows, just shelves and those awful fluorescent lights. I used to get assigned to reorganize files in there when we were slow. It was fine during the day, but if I ever had to pop in late, like after 9 or 10, there was this sound. Not pipes, not the elevator, not someone's phone. Just this little bell ringing somewhere behind the back wall, like one of those old servant bells you see in period dramas. Only there weren't any. Nothing but drywall behind the shelves. Maintenance checked no wiring, no devices. Boss laughed it off, said I was hearing the building settling. Maybe I was. I switched jobs anyway. Still hate the sound of bells in old houses. No bells remain in the building. On paper, the system is gone. The wires are severed, the hardware scrapped, the labels thrown away. But if you listen to the stories, to the way they arrange themselves over time, it feels less like the bell system ended and more like it sank out of sight. Like a ship disappearing below the surface, its shape still there in the dark, invisible, until something brushes against it. People keep hearing things in that house. A little metallic ting behind a wall where nothing should be. A sound like a bell rope being tugged in a space that no longer has cords. And every time I come across another one of those accounts, I feel that same chill I felt the first night in my apartment, when a tiny sharp sound rang behind my own wall while I was reading about 50 Berkeley Square. It's easy from a distance to say coincidence, imagination, the way human brains latch onto patterns and repeat them. But once you know that a man died with his hands locked around a cord in that room, once you've read the stiff lines of a coroner's report that quietly admit they have no idea why his heart stopped, once you've traced decades of people insisting that something gray and shapeless moves along those walls, it changes how you hear things. A bell is no longer just a bell. It might be the sound of someone somewhere pulling for help in a room that was bricked over a century ago. Or it might be the nameless thing reminding you that just because you plaster over a door and write heart failure on a piece of paper, that doesn't mean a story is finished. By the time I finally decided to go, it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like something that had been slowly tightening around my life for months, a drawn cord, a pressure behind the walls, and eventually, there was only one place left for it to pull me. Not my smartest choice, flying across an ocean because of a story, but I'm past pretending this is normal. The night I leave my apartment complex looks exactly like it always does. Concrete edges, artificial daylight blasting down from tall metal poles. The parking lot floodlights bleach the world into flat whites and black shadows pinned directly under every car. My building's exterior hallway hums with that ugly fluorescent buzz as I lock the door. The deadbolt clicks, chain slides, a little mechanical routine my hands know by heart. For a second, I stand there, key in the lock, listening. AC unit in the wall off. Fridge humming. The neighbor's TV muffled mid-sitcom laughter. The elevator at the end of the hall dings once as the doors open on some other late-night commuter. No bells. That shouldn't disappoint me, but it does. I walk down the metal stairs, sneakers ringing faintly on each step, the sound traveling down the supports and back up into my hands as a slight vibration on the railing. The air smells like asphalt and someone's overcooked microwave dinner venting out into the night. My car sits exactly where I left it, under the sickly halo of a pole light. When I hit the unlock button, it responds with its usual sequence. One sharp beep, hazard lights flash twice. The dashboard lights wink on inside like an artificial sunrise. It's such a small, familiar sound, the chirp of my own car, that I almost laugh thinking about the paths that brought me here, from a man's heart stopping in a London bedroom in 1840 to that cheerful plastic beep in a mid-range American parking lot. Just a research trip, I tell myself as I throw my bag in the back seat. The words sound thin against the metal. The engine starts with a chime and a brief flare of radio static before my phone hijacks the Bluetooth. The GPS app's voice cuts through with its calm, synthetic certainty. Head north on Oak Ridge, then turn right to merge onto I-90. The interstate at night is its own kind of lullaby, the steady roar of tires on concrete, the invisible rush of air as 18-wheelers pass the rhythmic thump-thump. As you cross those expansion joints, they never quite smooth out. Green and white overhead signs swoop into view and vanish again. CR Port Exit 7 long-term parking car rental returns. Every sound is cataloged now, whether I want it to be or not. Turn signal ticking, engine humming at a steady RPM. My blinker forgotten for 3 extra flashes before I notice and flick it off. Nothing like a bell. I tell myself that's good. The airport is awake in a completely different way than my apartment complex. Bright, noisy, fluorescent. The sliding doors sigh open when I walk up, motion sensors clicking invisibly. Inside, the world becomes wheels and voices rolling, suitcases rattling over tile heels, clipping PA announcements echoing. Flight 278 to London Heathrow, now boarding at Gate 22. A chime punctuates the announcement, 3 soft tones rising in sequence. I feel my shoulders tighten at the sound before I catch myself. It's not a servant's bell. It's not even close. Just the bland corporate noise every airport uses to get your attention. Still, when it plays again, higher and louder over by another gate, I can't stop my mind from mapping it against a different bell system in a different century, in a house that's been repurposed more times than anyone remembers. Somewhere in my head, a brass bell twitches and rings in sympathy. I move through security on autopilot laptop, out shoes, off bin, shoved onto the belt walk, through the scanner with my hands over my head. Everything is plastic bins, thumping belts, whirring TSA agents mumbling instructions they've said 1,000 times. At the gate, televisions chatter quietly with muted news. People make little nests at the outlets, plugging in phones, laptops, headphones. I sit near the window, watching planes taxi on the wet black tarmac, red wing lights blinking like patient, slow heartbeats. I keep telling myself this is ridiculous. People go to London to see museums, to take photos of phone booths, to pretend they're in some BBC drama. Nobody buys a transatlantic ticket because of an address they found in a 19th century coroner's report, and a bell they heard once in their own wall. Just research, I mutter, staring at my reflection ghosted over the glass. You want to stand in the space, that's all. Connect the dots. Put your feet where his were. Then you come home. But even as I say it, it feels like I'm lying to both of us, you listening and me. I don't just want to stand in the space. I need to. The boarding chime sounds again, those 3 soft, rising tones, and we file down the jet bridge, shoes squeaking on rubber. Inside the plane, Everything is a controlled chorus overhead. Bin latches, snapping seatbelts, clacking flight attendants' rehearsed speech over the crackling intercom. Once we're in the air, the white noise of the engines fills every corner of my head. The cabin darkens overhead, lights clicking off row by row until only reading lamps float above isolated islands of wakefulness. I should sleep. I don't. Instead, I sit there, cramped in economy, watching the tiny airplane inch across the digital map on the seatback screen. Every now and then, the seatbelt sign dings on with a bright, clean tone. It hits me like a flashback every time a small, precise ring in an enclosed space, causing an entire group of people to react at once. Hands go automatically to buckles. Conversations pause. Drinks are set down. It's not a bell, I tell myself. Not that bell. Different time. Different sky. Somewhere over the ocean, with the cabin lights dim and most of the people around me asleep, I find myself listening through the engine noise for anything that doesn't belong, a stray chime, a faint metallic ting from somewhere it shouldn't come from. Nothing does. When we finally descend, the difference in light hits me first. The world outside the window is gray, not the sharp concrete gray of my parking lot at night, but a softer, heavier gray that seems to sit on the buildings themselves. The sky is low and damp. The runway looks slick, painted with long streaks of reflected terminal lights. Heathrow at mid-morning is a different kind of chaos than my home airport. More accents, more languages bled into the background hum. Announcements roll by in a smoother cadence, consonants turned over in British mouths and sent spinning down the halls. The air smells different too. Less like fryer oil and stale coffee, more like metal and rain and too many people shoved into a space that was designed before half of them were born. Mind your head, the flight attendant says as I duck out of the plane. The words are nothing on paper, but I feel them land. I move through passport control, the queue shuffling forward in small bursts. Passport stamp a dry thump ink, slightly damp. Baggage claim belts whirring, trolleys squeaking, doors hissing open to spit us out into arrivals where a forest of signs waits, names, car services, hotel logos. Outside, the air slaps me with a layer of cold I'm not dressed for. It carries a smell I've only ever read about, damp stone. It's in the walls, in the sidewalks, in the gaps between buildings. The sky is nowhere, and everywhere at once, a uniform cloud, lid pressing down. I take the underground into the city, the train's arrival announced by a rush of air through the tunnel that feels like a held breath finally released. The doors beep before closing, two quick notes, one low, one high, and the automated voice tells me to mind the gap. Every station sounds slightly different, varying echo, different pitch in the brakes as we slow. Buskers' music filters in from somewhere above on the escalators. Luggage wheels clatter on steps where people don't wait for elevators. At street level, London is louder and quieter than home at the same time. Cars pass, but they're smaller, closer their engines, less of a roar and more of a drone. Double-decker buses sigh and hiss at curbs, their brakes exhaling loud, warm breaths into the cold air. Voices roll around me in accents, my ears keep tripping over vowels traveling longer distances. I walk, dragging my suitcase over uneven pavement, each small bump, a reminder that these stones have been here longer than my entire country. The map app on my phone whispers directions in the same calm American voice it uses back home, completely unfazed by the fact that it's being asked to navigate a street grid that predates it by centuries. Turn left onto Bruton Street, continue straight for 300 feet, and then finally arrived. Berkeley Square. In photos, it always looked like a generic patch of greenery trees, a fence, a ring of townhouses. In person, it feels curated. controlled. The garden in the center is neat, manicured, the paths curved just enough to look organic while still being obviously designed. Pigeons coo from the branches. A few people sit on benches with takeaway coffee cups talking softly or scrolling on their phones. The traffic noise here is muted in that specific expensive way, absorbed by wealth and thick glass. The cars parked along the curb are glossy, understated luxury. Nothing loud, nothing ostentatious, just quietly obscene money. The townhouses around the square are tall and elegant brick fronts, scrubbed doorways framed in white. Some have discreet plaques by the doors. Some have intercom panels and company names instead of door knockers. Number 50 is exactly where it's supposed to be. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd walk right past it. The facade is clean windows, modernized just enough to keep out drafts and lawsuits. There's a tasteful brass plate near the door with the name of a consulting firm etched into it. A security camera is tucked under the eave, a black, unblinking eye. But the bones are the same. Same height, same width, same placement of windows on the second floor, same stretch of brick that once upon a time enclosed a bedroom with a 4-poster bed and a red cord hanging from the ceiling. Standing on the pavement across from it, suitcase handle in my hand, I feel the hairs on my arms rise under my jacket. Not from cold, from recognition. The building looks back at me. That's the only way I can put it. There's no literal face, no movement behind the glass, but there's a sensation that my presence has been noted. As if somewhere deep inside, behind renovated corridors and drywall partitions and tasteful conference rooms, something old has turned its attention toward the front door. A bus sighs to a stop behind me. A car glides past, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Someone laughs softly in the garden. A distant church bell tolls the hour in a measured, dignified peal. Under all of that, for just a second, I think I hear it. A small, sharp ting like a tiny brass bell being flicked with a fingernail, muffled by distance and walls and time. It could be anything. A piece of metal settling. A sound drifting from a nearby shop. An echo my brain invented because it wanted it so badly. But standing there, staring up at the windows of number 50, feeling watched by a house that technically shouldn't remember me, I can't shake the feeling that it's not a coincidence. I didn't come all this way just for research, and the building knows it. The weirdest part is how easy it is to get in. I don't knock on the door of number 50 and say, "Hi, I'm here because I can't stop thinking about a man who died in your second-floor bedroom 180 years ago." I send emails, professional ones, with subject lines like inquiry, local history research, 19th century townhouse use. I mention a potential article, a possible podcast series about urban legends anchored in real spaces. I drop the name of the street, the square, a couple of dates. I attach a scan of a very boring property map from 1838, the same one I stayed up until 2 a.m., finding in an online archive. People like being part of history in theory. A week later, I get a reply from an office manager whose name sounds like it belongs on a brass plate. Polite, efficient, vaguely amused. Yes, they say the building is indeed of historical interest. Yes, I may have a brief look, provided I don't disrupt business. No photographs of staff, sign in at reception. That's it. No mention of hauntings. No warning about bells. When I push open the heavy front door, the first impression is smell. Not dust and coal, not furniture polish. It's that universal modern office scent, coffee toner, faint citrus cleaning chemicals, and too many people breathing conditioned air. Inside, the lighting is bright and even. Recessed LEDs glow in the ceiling. There's a sleek reception desk where a hall table would have been. The receptionist has a headset and a dual monitor setup. Behind her, someone has hung abstract art, big swaths of color, meant to say we are serious, but not dead inside. Under all of it, though, the floor creaks. You don't hear it right away. At first, it's the things you expect, the soft whir of a printer spitting out pages somewhere down the hall, the low hum of a copier stand by the distant burr of someone's phone vibrating on a desk. Voices leak from behind glass doors in softened fragments. Run those numbers again. We can circle back. Client's not happy. Then I take a step away from the entry mat. The floorboard beneath the new carpet gives a tiny, complaining groan, muted but there. I feel it in my ankles more than I hear it. Old wood under new skin. The receptionist checks my ID, has me sign a visitor log that lives in a spreadsheet now instead of a paper book. Pen on plastic tablet instead of ink on rough paper. As I write my name, I hear the faint hiss of air moving through vents above us, the steady background sigh of the HVAC system feeding every room the same pre-packaged climate. No fireplaces, no coal, just metal ducts and spinning fans. "You're interested in the old layout?" she asks, handing me a paper visitor badge with the building's logo on it. The sticker crackles softly when I peel it and slap it onto my chest. "That's right," I say, and my voice sounds too bright in my own ears. "Early Victorian use room functions, that sort of thing." She smiles the polite, non-committal smile of someone who has more emails to answer and buzzes the inner door open for me. As soon as I step through, the sound changes again. The corridor is narrower, and even though the walls are white and the carpet is new, the proportions are wrong for a modern office. Too tall, too thin. Doors where doors have always been, even if what lies behind them has changed a dozen times. And below the thin layer of carpet padding the bones of the house creak and settle with every step. An office manager, different accent, same headset, appears to walk me through. We do the small talk dance as we move, how long the firm has been here, how they love the character of these old places, even if the wiring is a nightmare. "All the public meeting rooms are on the first and second floors," she says, gesturing as we climb. "Top floor's mostly storage and server space now." I nod, but my focus has narrowed. I count each step as we go up. 1, 2, 3. The staircase has been refaced, but it's still steep, the angle too sharp compared to modern building codes. The runner is new, but the way it dips slightly in the center tells the truth about where feet have fallen for generations. 4, 5, 6. Someone upstairs laughs, a quick burst cut off mid-sentence as a door closes. A phone rings behind a wall, the tone peppy and digital. The air from the vent near my head blows gently, a steady shh that never existed in the 1840s. 7, 8, 9. I keep matching these steps to words I've read: narrow staircase, thin banister, gas sconce at the top. There's no flame now, just another recessed light, but the ceiling is still low enough there that I feel the impulse to duck. On the second floor landing, the carpet changes color, but not thickness. The hallway has been shaved and smoothed and painted into something that would look anonymous in any office building if you didn't know what it used to be. The footprint, though, is the same. I know that because I spent nights with scanned property plans on one screen and Google Maps on the other, measuring windows and wall lengths like I was trying to summon something. The position of the stairs in relation to the front door. The distance from the landing to the second window facing the square. The proportions of that upper front room. I'm particularly interested in the front second floor space, I say, trying to sound casual. The room overlooking the square. "That's one of our conference rooms now," the manager says. "We call it Berkeley." Very imaginative, I know. She smiles at her own joke, then leads me down the hall. Every step echoes a little in my head with someone else's boots. The walls are smoother now, drywall over old plaster. Some of the doors are framed in metal instead of wood. But the distance from the stairhead to that specific threshold is exactly what I expected. My body recognizes it absurdly from descriptions written by long-dead men. We stop at a door with a small, frosted glass panel and a brushed steel handle. There's a sign at eye level, Berkeley, please reserve via Outlook. The manager pushes it open and stands aside so I can enter first. The haunted bedroom is a conference room. Of course it is. Rectangular table in the middle surrounded by rolling chairs with black mesh backs. White walls with one section painted corporate blue. A flat screen mounted where the dresser once stood. HDMI cables coiled neatly on a credenza. The floor is covered in a low-pile gray carpet that absorbs sound. No rugs, no exposed boards. The window is in the same place. Tall, with a view directly over the square, double-glazed, now the glass thick and slightly reflective. I can see trees, benches, the curve of the road, a double-decker bus sliding past, like a red toy. The light that comes in is softer than back home, filtered through clouds and history. I step into the room and feel a weird, vertiginous layering the conference table in front of me, and overlaid on it ghost furniture I've built in my head from testimonies. 4-poster bed, curtains, dresser. I know from the old plans and the descriptions that the bed would have stood with its headboard along the interior wall, just there, a few feet from where the TV screen hangs now. The red cord would have hung from the ceiling above it, directly over where my shoulder is as I move to that spot. I walk around the table, slow, placing my feet where his would have fallen, if he'd gotten up in the night. The manager is talking about the challenges of installing modern networking in old buildings, having to run conduits along baseboards, trying not to drill through something historically significant. Her voice blurs at the edges. I nod in the right places, but my focus has collapsed down to about 6 square feet of carpet. This would have been the bedroom I ask more to myself than to her. Likely, she says. We have some old floor plans on file. There's a note about the front second-floor room being the main chamber in the early records. Now it's where we argue over budgets. I step into the spot where the head of the bed would have been. Right up against the wall, between where the flat screen and a framed Our Values poster hang now. I tilt my head back and look up at the ceiling. Smooth white paint. A round sprinkler head. A small circular vent. No hole. No cord. But my neck knows the angle. And my imagination fills in the missing piece, a length of red braid hanging down, frayed at the end, waiting for a hand. Sound narrows. The traffic outside is a distant hiss through the double glazing, more like ocean surf than individual cars. Somewhere on the floor below, a photocopier starts up its drum, whirring up to speed, spitting out pages with a soft, rhythmic wick, wick, wick. A phone rings in the next room, muffled by the wall, 3 electronic chirps, a pause, 3 more. Above me, air moves through the HVAC system, a low, constant whoosh from the vent, colder than the air in the center of the room. It brushes my face like a faint breath as I stand there. I realize my own heartbeat is loud enough in my ears to qualify as another sound in the mix. Thump, thump, a little too fast, a little too shallow. Are you all right? The manager asks, noticing maybe the way I've gone still. Fine, I say. My voice comes out softer than I mean it to. Just trying to picture it as it was. She nods, indulgent. Hard to imagine these rooms with beds in them, isn't it? I don't tell her that it isn't hard at all. Standing where I'm standing, feeling the faint give of old floorboards under the carpet, hearing the muted city through the glass, and the steady exhale of the vents, I can imagine it too well. I close my eyes for a second, not long enough to be weird, just long enough to layer sounds. Modern traffic, hiss printer, HVAC, distant phone. Past imagined the soft hiss of a gas lamp, The tick of a clock downstairs, the tiny metal ring of a bell somewhere below, dragged into frenzy by a hand pulling as hard as it can. "I just need a minute," I say. "Then I'll be out of your hair." She smiles and backs out of the room. The door closes with a soft, padded click. And for the first time since I walked into number 50, I'm alone. In the room where a man once died of something the coroner could only call unknown causes, standing exactly where his head would have been. Listening to a building that, according to the files, has no bells left at all. When the door clicked shut behind the office manager, the silence in the conference room changed flavor. It wasn't actually silent, of course. Modern rooms almost never are. There was still the low, steady breath of the HVAC coming from the vent above the distant murmur of traffic through the double-glazed window, the occasional muffled laugh or phone ring from somewhere else on the floor. But the human focus left with her. Whatever attention had been in the room was suddenly all mine. This is the part where, in other people's stories, they either bolt for the door or do something brave and stupid. I didn't bolt. And I've never thought of myself as brave. I did the stupid thing. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The case has this tiny nick at the corner from where I dropped it in my kitchen months ago, back when the worst sound I worried about was a plate shattering on tile. The familiarity of it under my fingers was grounding in a way the rest of this building wasn't. I opened the voice memo app without really thinking, thumb moving through muscle memory. The red circle icon waited bright and simple. If you're listening to this now, somewhere down the line, I wanted you to hear what I heard. Not just me telling you about it later, but the actual air in that room, the way it sounded, that weird mix of the present, layered over the echo of a past I'd been picking apart from behind a screen. I hit record. The timer started 0203. I held the phone chest level, not wanting to look like a weirdo holding it up to my face in an office where people were probably used to Zoom calls, not ghost hunters. I stood right where I believed the head of Robert's bed would have been my back, close to the walleyes on the ceiling. My voice sounded small in the room when I started speaking, smaller than I felt. "Okay," I murmured, trying to keep my tone steady, professional, like I was just making notes for later. It's Tuesday about 3 in the afternoon. I'm standing in the second floor front room at number 50 Berkeley Square. This space used to be the main bedroom in the mid-1800s. This is where Sir Robert Warboy spent the night before he died. I turned slowly as I talked, letting the mic pick up everything, the faint hiss of the vent, the distant whoosh of a bus making the corner of the square, the whispery rustle of the tree branches outside brushing against each other. Right now, it's a conference room, I went on. Flat screen on the wall where the dresser would have been, table where the bed probably sat. No visible bells, no chords. Just office sounds. I stopped letting the room tone sit on the recording for a few seconds. That's something I've picked up from listening to horror and true crime podcasts for years. Give the silence a chance to be itself on tape. Sometimes what you don't hear is as important as what you do. I could hear my own breath in the mic, that tiny rush between words. The AC sighed and settled. "I'm standing," I said quietly, roughly, where the headboard would have been. If there were still a cord, it'd probably be hanging. I glanced up even though I already knew what was there. Right. Above. The sound came in right over the top of that last word. A faint metallic ting from somewhere above my head. It was so soft that if I hadn't been standing dead still, I might have written it off as imagination. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, bright note like someone flicking the edge of a very small, very old bell. I froze. For a split second, I thought phone notification, but my screen was still on the recording app. No banner, no vibration. The ringer was off. Airplane mode was on from the underground, and I hadn't turned it off yet. The vent above me exhaled another line of air unbothered. Then it happened again. Ting, slightly different pitch this time. A bit lower, like a second bell answering the first. If you've never had your body react before your brain does, it's hard to explain. My skin tightened, goosebumps running up my arms under my jacket. Heart rate spiked. Breath went shallow. It felt like the moment on a roller coaster when you realize the harness might not be as secure as you thought. I tilted my head back further, staring up at the ceiling like I could force it to confess. Flat white paint, a sprinkler head, a circular air vent. No fixtures, no loose chains, nothing metal that should have been able to make that particular sound. "Okay," I whispered, knowing the mic would pick it up. What the hell was that? Some instinct made me take a step to the side as if I might be directly under some weird, localized creak. Carpet under my shoe felt the same as it had a minute ago. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. Then, from somewhere that wasn't exactly above me, not exactly anywhere I could pinpoint, the third one ting. A little sharper, as if whoever or whatever was making it had flicked harder. 3 notes. Not in any recognizable pattern. Not part of any notification tone I'd ever heard on a phone or computer or elevator, nor the musical chime of the building's fire system test I'd heard earlier at reception. And they didn't sound like they were coming from a speaker. There's a texture to real metal when it vibrates a resonance. This had it. I swallowed hard enough that I heard it in my own ears. Pipes, I said out loud to the empty room and to myself. Old building, old pipes. Expansion, contraction. I wanted the words on the recording. I wanted proof that I'd tried to be reasonable. I moved toward the corner, pressing my fingers lightly to the wall. It felt like drywall over brick, cool to the touch. No vibration. I held my phone in my other hand, mic up, capturing mostly my own shaky breathing. Nothing else came. No fourth bell, no mysterious knock. The building settled into its usual background noise, HVAC breathing traffic, sighing printers and conversations muffled by doors. After another minute of standing there like an idiot with my hand on the wall, I hit stop on the recording. The red bar froze. 0319. I saved it automatically, gave it a name without thinking, Berkeley Room Tone 1. By the time the office manager came back to check on me, I'd convinced myself I knew what I'd heard. A coincidental series of noises, maybe a piece of ductwork pinging, maybe some metal brace cooling above the ceiling. If you spend long enough steeped in a story about bells, your brain is going to map any stray metallic sound onto that image. That's what I told myself walking back down those stairs, the floor complaining under each step. I didn't listen to the recording on the tube. I didn't listen to it walking back to my hotel, past souvenir shops and chain restaurants and black cabs purring at the curb. I didn't listen while I checked in, while I nodded through the front desk spiel about breakfast hours and Wi-Fi codes. It wasn't until I was in my hotel room, standard business box, beige walls, generic framed prints, door-locked bag dumped on the chair, that I finally sat on the edge of the bed and opened the app. The room had its own sounds, traffic filtered through double-glazed windows, the distant siren that seems to be built into every city, the quiet whump-whump of the room's own AC unit starting and stopping. I put in my earbuds, scrolled to Berkeley Room Tone 1, pressed play. My own voice came through, first thinner and more tentative than it had felt in my chest. Okay. It's Tuesday, about 3 in the afternoon. I listened to myself describe the room, the history, the bed. I heard the air vent in the conference room as a soft, constant shh under my words, the faint, distant rumble of buses outside. Then I fell quiet on the recording. room tone. And then, at the 16-second mark, clear as if it had been struck next to the mic ting. Even knowing it was coming, the sound made my shoulders jump. It was brighter on tape than it had been in the room, stripped of all the other ambient noise. Clean, very small, very real. There was a pause just long enough for my recorded breath to hitch. Then the second ting, slightly lower. You could hear the metal vibrate a fraction of a second longer, a soft tail of sound. I paused the recording thumb, hovering over the screen. In my hotel room, the AC unit clicked off, leaving a brief, heavy quiet. A car honked faintly several floors below. I restarted the memo. On it, I heard my own real-time whisper. Okay, what the hell was that? Then my footsteps, the soft rustle of clothing as I moved my fingers, brushing the wall. The vent breathed overhead. 30 seconds later, the third chime tinged sharper, like something impatient. I scrubbed back, listening again and again. There were no overlapping voices, no intercom beep, no echo of a printer. The bells, because that's what they sounded like, no matter what I'd decided to call them. They sat alone in the track, as if they weren't artifacts at all, but intentional. I backed out of the memo and opened another app, my notes. Scrolled through the mess of screenshots and scribbles until I found the ones that mattered. A maid's terrified recollection of the bell in the servants' quarters going wild one afternoon when no one was on the upper floor. A brief private letter from a visiting clergyman describing a terrible jangling of the bell to the upper bedroom that ceased at once as I reached the landing. The inquest testimony where one friend mentions the bell rattling with such violence below that we could scarce hear our own steps. 3 big bell incidents. 3 times. I had underlined them once late at night at my kitchen table, noting the rough timing between each. How long the bell supposedly rang, how many panicked seconds stretched between the first sound and the moment someone reached the door, how abruptly it stopped. On the recording, the 3 chimes sat at 16 seconds, 22 seconds, and 51 seconds. I did the math without meaning to brain-sliding numbers into place. The gaps between them matched the ratios I'd scribbled in the margins of those testimonies. Not identical to the second. Obviously, that's not how memory works, but close enough that the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt less like 3 random building noises and more like an echo, an answer, as if the room, given the chance and a microphone, had chosen to speak, in the only language it remembered, a series of small brass notes spaced out along the spine of time to mirror nights when someone else had pulled a cord in terror. You could call that coincidence. Confirmation bias. A brain wired for pattern recognition doing its job a little too enthusiastically. Sitting there on that bland hotel bed, earbuds, and listening to those 3 bright, impossible chimes over and over, while the anonymous hum of London seeped through the window, it didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like the house on Berkeley Square had heard me standing where a dead man once stood. And for the first time across a century and a half, it rang back. By the time I got back to the States, I'd almost convinced myself it would all stay on the other side of the ocean. Airports are good at that, scrubbing off whatever you picked up somewhere else and replacing it with plastic familiarity. Heathrow spat me out into fluorescent morning. The plane swallowed me, pressurized and humming. Hours later, the cabin lights came up in that queasy half-light they use to pretend dawn is wherever they want it to be, and suddenly we were descending into my reality again. The wheels hit the runway with a thud that jolted my teeth. People clapped in that half-ironic way they do when they're relieved to still be alive. Cabin bins popped open with hollow clacks. "Welcome back," the flight attendant said over the intercom voice, distorted by the cheap speaker. "Local time is 9:12 p.m. It felt later. The airport here smelled more like fryer oil and industrial cleaner than damp stone. The announcement voices were flatter, Midwestern vowels stretched out over baggage claim. Even the floor sounded different under my shoes, hard polished, too bright. I grabbed my suitcase off the belt, the handle thudding into my palm, and followed the river of people toward rideshare pickup. Outside, the night was warmer than London's, the air a little greasy from the highway. The noise was familiar engines, idling, someone yelling for a kid to stay close, the rolling clatter of suitcase wheels on cracked concrete. An Uber logo appeared on a black sedan's windshield. My phone buzzed. "Your driver has arrived." I opened the back door, my bag's wheels scraping against the rubber mat as I hauled it in. "How's your night?" the driver asked automatic. "Long," I said. "Just got in from London." He let out a low whistle. "Oof. Well, sit back. We'll get you home." The car slipped onto the interstate. Overhead signs glowed green and white exit numbers marching by. The GPS on the dashboard spoke in the same calm, synthetic tone as my phone. "In 1.5 miles, take exit 27 to Oak Ridge Avenue." Out the window, the city looked like itself, clustered lights. The orange glare of sodium street lamps, a convenience store sign buzzing faintly in the distance. Somewhere out there, my apartment building waited unremarkable and cheap, the opposite of number 50 in every way, but one I knew exactly how it sounded in the middle of the night. By the time the Uber turned down my street, my eyelids felt like sandpaper. Jet lag sat heavy on my shoulders. When we pulled up in front of my place, the brick wall of the building looked more tired than sinister, streaked with old rain and exhaust the way it always does. The security light over the side entrance flickered in its usual pattern, on-off, on buzzing, while it decided if it still had the will to live. The driver wished me a good night. The trunk thunked shut behind me with a dull, hollow echo. Inside, my footsteps on the concrete stairs sounded exactly right. The echo in the stairwell. The faint smell of old carpet and somebody's takeout. The elevator dinged once for my floor doors, opening with a soft, hydraulic sigh. Home. My door lock turned with its usual resistance, the deadbolt scraping just a little before giving. The light switch clicked. The living room sprang into its familiar yellowish glow. The first thing that hit me was the hum. Same fridge humming in the corner of the open-plan kitchen. Same AC unit rattling in the wall beneath the window, then settling into its low, steady drone. The microwave clock glowed 2:11 a.m. in dim green numbers because my stove clock and my microwave clock are never quite in sync. Everything smelled like itself, a little stale, a little dusty, a hint of coffee, and whatever detergent my last load of laundry didn't quite rinse out. It felt like walking onto a stage set I'd left in a hurry and returned to months later, nothing moved, everything waiting. I dumped my luggage by the couch, kicked off my shoes, and stood in the middle of the living room for a second, letting the ambient noise wash over me. The highway outside murmured. Upstairs, my neighbor's TV murmured through the ceiling, some talk show host's cadence just recognizable. The building's plumbing exhaled in the walls. No bells. I waited another heartbeat anyway, just in case. Nothing. The normalcy was almost disappointing. I showered. The water pressure here feels louder, harsher than hotel showers hammering the tile. The fan in the bathroom whined in its usual off-key pitch. Steam fogged the mirror. By the time I collapsed into bed, my phone had barely enough battery to set an alarm. I figured I'd wake up at the wrong time anyway. Jet lag is mean like that, but at least I'd tried. The white noise of my own AC unit filled the bedroom. The fridge clicked in the kitchen. My neighbor turned off their TV. The sudden absence of sound made the building feel like it had paused. The last thing I saw before sleep finally dragged me under was the microwave clock across the room, 2-something a.m., the colon between the numbers blinking at a slow, indifferent pace. For a little while, life went back to pretending it was normal. Days passed. My body tried to remember what time zone it belonged to. I went back to work, email spreadsheets, the steady march of calendar notifications. I ordered takeout. I ran the dishwasher at midnight. I watched dumb videos just to put something in my head that wasn't an old townhouse and a dead man clinging to a cord. Except it didn't stick. Whenever I had a spare moment, I found myself pulling out my phone and staring at the file, Berkeley Room, Tone 1. I told myself I was just checking in, making sure it still sounded the way I remembered, as if the recording could change without me touching it. Every time I hit play, those 3 bright, impossible chimes landed exactly where they always had, clean, metallic, indifferent to my pulse rate. I started to notice other sounds lining up with them. Those fire alarm tests, for example. They'd always been part of the building's background annoyance, a once-a-month blast of electronic shriek in the middle of some random weekday, a cheery notice taped to the elevator about scheduled safety checks. But now they seemed to time themselves with my thoughts. I'd be rereading a paragraph from the coroner's inquest at my kitchen table, the one that talked about massive heart failure due to unknown causes, and I'd catch myself thinking about the servant's bell at number 50, about how hard someone would have to yank a cord to rip it out of the ceiling. And right then, as if cued, the fire alarm would go off. Not in the middle of the night, not at 3 a.m. I'm not giving you cheap jump scares, but always in those weird little quiet pockets when my mind drifted back to the bells. Once I went down to the lobby while it was shrieking, ears ringing, and asked the super, "Didn't we just have a test last week?" He squinted at his clipboard, shrugged. "They send the schedule," he said. "We just hit the button." I checked my email later. The notice had been there. I'd just forgotten I'd seen it. That's what I told myself. Then there were the phone sounds. I keep my notifications pretty locked down, texts, calls, a couple of apps I actually care about. Everything else is silenced. I know what my phone sounds like. So the first time it made a noise, I didn't recognize a tiny, clear chime, just one. It made me flinch. I was in the kitchen, fridge humming, pan sizzling. My laptop open on the counter, a PDF of a floor plan glowing on screen. I just zoomed in on the little square labeled upper chamber when something went ping behind me. Not the oven, not the microwave, not the elevator. I grabbed my phone off the table. Screen dark. No banner, no missed calls, no alerts. I checked the sound settings anyway. Scrolled through every tone in the list. None of them matched. Glitch, I muttered. It happens. Except it happened again. In the living room late one night with my headphones off and the TV silent, I was reading online about other Berkeley Square stories, half doom-scrolling, half research, when I heard it 3 short, soft tones in a row. Ping, ping, ping. I snapped my eyes to the phone. Screen blank. No notification. Nothing in the history when I checked. No app trying to get my attention. The elevator started to bother me too. It's old, but functional, the kind that ding-dings once when it hits your floor. That single chime is part of my building's basic soundtrack. One-note doors open, someone steps out. Except some nights when I was alone in my apartment, lights low, laptop open to yet another iteration of most haunted room in London, I'd hear it from down the hall, ding, 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 3 times in slow, deliberate succession. I'd pause whatever I was doing, listening for footsteps, for the soft thud of someone's door. Sometimes there were. Sometimes the hallway stayed weirdly quiet, like the elevator had opened and closed its doors in an empty corridor. You can probably guess what I did. I tried to catch it. One evening around midnight, after hearing the triple chime twice in a week, I walked out into the hallway when it sounded and hit the button for the elevator myself. Doors slid open, inside nobody. Just the faint smell of metal and old carpet, and the mechanical hum of the car, thinking about where it might have to go next. I looked up at the speaker grill above the door, the place where the ding comes from. The cheap plastic mesh looked back at me. Faulty wiring, I told myself. Button stuck somewhere. System just re-pinging. It's amazing how far you can bend your logic to avoid the one conclusion you don't want. Because here's what I kept coming back to, lying awake in my bed at 2-something a.m., while the microwave clock glowed, while the AC unit cycled, while traffic whispered on the highway, and some unseen neighbor dropped something heavy upstairs. I went to London. I stood in a room that shouldn't have had any bells left, and I walked away with 3 clear chimes captured on my phone. Then I came home. And the sounds in my building, fire alarms, phones, elevator dings, started lining up, echoing, mimicking, just enough to make me wonder if I'd brought something back with me that didn't need a passport. Before London, my nights had a shape. They were messy and restless and sometimes too long, but they followed a pattern: fall asleep to the TV murmuring in the next room, wake up once to pee roll over when the upstairs neighbor slammed a door. The sounds of the building were just there, unimportant. Background. Now every night feels like a test. The first few days after I got back, I tried to pretend everything was the same. I went to bed at my usual time, phone on the nightstand, AC unit rattling away under the window like always. I'd scroll for too long, eyes burning, then finally give in, plug the phone in, kill the lamp, and let the dark fold over the room. The bedroom is not big. Bed cheap, dresser, closet door that never quite shuts all the way. The only light is whatever leaks in from the window. Street lamps, the distant glow from that 24-hour gas station, and the little green digits on the microwave clock in the open-plan kitchen bleeding softly through the crack in the doorway. When the AC cycles off, it's like the entire apartment inhales and forgets to exhale. You don't notice that sound until it's gone, that constant low white noise. Then it cuts out with a hollow thunk, and what's left feels wrong, like the room has dropped several degrees, even if it hasn't. The silence that follows isn't pure. It's full of tiny noises that had been hiding under the louder ones. The fridge clicks once, a dry, precise sound, before its compressor settles into a softer hum. Somewhere in the wall, the plumbing knocks 1, 2, 3 taps, as if someone's knuckles wrapped from inside the pipe. I lie there on my back, eyes on the ceiling, listening. Once upon a time, that would have been the end of it. I'd roll over, maybe shove a pillow over my head, to block out the neighbor's late-night movie, or the distant siren wailing past on the highway. The building would creak, breathe, do its thing. My brain would translate it as pipes, neighbors, the building breathing, nothing more. If you live in an apartment long enough, you learn its language. The weird groan when the wind hits the north side. The flutter in the vent when someone on another floor slams a door. The way the elevator makes a low, mechanical sigh every time it hits your level. They all used to be words in a familiar vocabulary. Now every small sound feels like a signal. I'm telling you this straight, because if you've ever listened to horror stories at 2 a.m. with earbuds and lights off, you already know the feeling I'm describing. That shift from my house is making noises to my house might be speaking. I haven't slept properly since London. Not really. I lie there exhausted, and instead of drifting, I catalog things. The AC kicks on with its usual wheeze. I count the seconds before it smooths into a steady drone. I know the rhythm now, 30 seconds of struggle, then the clean hum. When it cuts off again, I track the exact moment the sound drops away. The fridge has its own cycle. A soft whir, a dull click, a brief silence, then a faint vibration, as it starts back up. The plumbing knocks more often than it used to, or maybe I just never paid attention before. It's never regular. Sometimes it's a single sharp tap. Sometimes a little stuttering sequence, like something trying to get a message through and giving up halfway. Footsteps in the hall. 2 doors down, someone has a new boyfriend or girlfriend who leaves late. I recognize the pattern. The slow walk to the elevator, the pause, the ding, the doors opening, the soft shuffle inside. The doors close. The ding repeats on the ground floor, fainter, filtered through concrete. Every sound has an excuse. I remind myself of that like a mantra. And then some nights the excuses get harder to sell. There's this one night I remember the time because I looked at the clock 3 times to be sure. The day before had been bad. Work was a mess, my concentration shot. I'd opened my phone in the middle of a meeting, and out of pure habit thumbed the voice memo from Berkeley Square. I'd shoved my phone face down on the table before the first ting played out loud. That night, I went to bed later than I should have, hoping sheer exhaustion would knock me out and keep me under. It worked, sort of. I dropped fast. No dreams I can remember. When I woke up, it was to the feeling that the room had changed shape around me. Not temperature exactly, not light. Sound. The AC had just kicked off. I could tell from the faint vibration still fading out in the wall. The fridge was in one of its quiet phases. The building felt hollow. My eyes opened in the dark. The microwave clock glowed weakly through the bedroom doorway, 2:13 a.m. If you've been paying attention, you know that's not just a random time. A lot of the old accounts from 50 Berkeley Square pick an hour in that neighborhood, the dead middle of the night, the point where even the city seems to hesitate. In my notes, I'd circled it more than once. 2:10, 2:13, 2:17. Now here it was in cheap green digits staring back at me from my own kitchen. I lay very still, breathing shallow. The air felt thick, like the room was full of something invisible that didn't want to be disturbed. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself I'd been reading too many reports, listening to that recording too often. And then I heard it. A bell. Small. Metallic. 3 notes, each separate, spaced just far enough apart to make sure I had time to register them. Ting A paused long enough for my heart to slam once against my ribs. Ting. Another pause, my fingers curling involuntarily against the sheet. Ting. It was not my phone. I knew all my phone's noises by then intimately. It was not the fire alarm, those are aggressive electronic designed to hurt. It was not the elevator ding. That sound always comes with a faint mechanical rumble under it, the vibration of cables and gears. This was cleaner. It sounded like someone standing just outside my bedroom door, flicking the edge of a tiny brass bell with their fingernail. Not hard, not angry, just enough to prove they could. My body moved before my brain had finished deciding whether this was stupid. I threw the covers aside and swung my legs out of bed. The carpet was cold under my feet. I crossed the room in 3 long strides and yanked the door open so fast it slammed into the stopper. The hallway outside was empty. The motion sensor light over the far exit clicked on with its usual soft plastic tick, startled by my sudden movement. Harsh fluorescent spill flooded the corridor, turning the beige carpet into something flat and ugly. The exit sign above the stairwell glowed a steady, indifferent red. The elevator doors at the far end were closed, seam-tight digital floor number glowing unchanged. No mechanical hum. No fan. No indication it had moved in the last few minutes. There were no kids laughing and running away. No neighbor with a prank bell. No phones left on the floor. No open doors. No retreating footsteps. just the faint buzzing of the fluorescent light, the low, familiar hum of the building's arteries, and the soft whisper of the AC system pushing processed air down the vent. All the normal sounds, and hanging over them in the space between my pounding heartbeats, the memory of those 3 little chimes that had no business being here. I didn't want to tell you this part. When people send stories to channels like this, they always hold something back. At first, the detail that makes them sound crazy instead of just scared. This is mine. You already know the broad strokes, the man in London who pulled a cord until his heart gave out, the room that learned to speak in bells, the recording I made in a conference room that shouldn't have had anything to ring. What I haven't said out loud yet is what happened after I brought that audio home, and what started happening the more I talked about it. At first, I treated the recording like evidence. I'd play it late at night at my desk, headphones on, cursor hovering over the exact second where the first ting hits. I'd show it to a couple of friends on Discord, the kind who already like this kind of thing. Listen, I'd say. Tell me what you hear. Every time the bells played, they reacted the way you probably did, at least in their heads. A flinch, a nervous joke, an immediate reach for some rational explanation, a metal vent pinging the mic, glitching an unnoticed phone in another room. But then I started noticing something I couldn't shrug off as easily. The more I told the story, the more the sounds around me changed. On nights when I sat down at my cheap desk in my American apartment, opened a blank document, and started writing this all out from the beginning, the gentleman's club, the key on the table, the scream, and the gunshot, the building seemed to lean in. If I replayed the recording once, maybe nothing happened. If I looped it, if I sat there obsessing over the timing between the chimes, dragging the cursor back and forth like I was rewinding a tape in my skull, that's when the glitches started. The fire alarm tests randomly scheduled for the exact afternoons I'd planned to work on the script. The phone that made sounds no app claimed. The elevator that dinged 3 times in an empty hallway after midnight. It felt less and less like coincidence and more like something else. Like attention itself had become a chord. In 1840, if you wanted help, you reached up in the dark and yanked on a piece of red braid until metal screamed against metal downstairs. That was how you pulled someone toward you, a servant, a friend, anyone awake enough to listen. Now I sit in a different century in front of a microphone and a keyboard, and I tug on a story. Every time I hit play on that Berkeley Square file, every time I open another scan of the inquest, every time I move my cursor back to type the word bell one more time, it feels like I'm putting weight on that same system. Only there's no cord in my ceiling, no brass strip on a wall. Just a memory of a room stretched thin across time and your attention focused on it. That's the part that starts to bother me most, the way the noises seem to track with focus rather than with place. They don't just happen in my apartment anymore. They happen in my car at red lights when I'm rehearsing this narration out loud. They happen in quiet corners at work when I'm reading comments about haunted houses on my lunch break. If this is all in my head, it's picked up a nasty talent for sound design. So let me turn this around on you for a second. Where are you right now? Are you parked in a dim corner of a garage, the concrete around you, holding on to the day's heat? Your dashboard still ticking as it cools, the occasional car echoing 2 floors above. Are you lying in your bed, staring at the same crack in your ceiling you always stare at when you can't sleep? Earbuds and phone screen dimmed your own AC rumbling in the wall like mine does. Are you sitting in a cubicle under buzzing fluorescence, pretending to work while a pair of headphones turns your office into someone else's problem for 15 minutes? Or maybe you're on a long, dark highway right now, this audio bleeding out of your car speakers. The only light on your dashboard washing your hands in blue. Look around, or don't if you'd rather not. Either way, listen. What do you hear when you're not trying to hear anything at all? The quiet rush of the vents in your ceiling, feeding pre-cooled air into your space. The faint clunk of pipes behind your walls when someone else somewhere else flushes a toilet. The fridge in the next room humming and then clicking off, leaving an odd, hollow gap behind it. The little sounds your own building makes when it thinks you're not paying attention. Before all this, for me, that's all they were: noises. Evidence that the world hadn't stopped spinning. Now every time something rings in a way it shouldn't, the lines between my life and that room in London blur a little more. And here's where the story stops being comfortably mine. Because I went to Berkeley Square and stood where the bed was. I held up my phone in that spot and said, "This is what it sounds like now." And something in that room, something with no bell left to pull, answered me anyway. Then I came home, sat in front of a microphone and started telling you about it. Recording it. Rewriting it when the first drafts didn't sound right. Retelling it in slightly different shapes. Each version another tug. Robert pulled that red cord until his heart and whatever passed for courage inside him gave out. I opened a recording in a different century and heard a bell no one installed. You hit play on this video in your own quiet space. Maybe that's another kind of pull. I'm not saying that listening to a story can haunt you the way a room can. I'm not saying this audio will follow you home like luggage you forgot to declare at customs. Stories aren't viruses. They can't crawl out of your phone and scratch at your bedroom door. But attention is a kind of invitation. Every minute you spend picturing that four-poster bed, that red cord, that row of brass bells on a wall, you're doing the same thing I did when I stepped onto that flight, choosing to step nearer to something that might prefer not to be alone. And if there's anything in that old house that still knows how to listen, how to move along beams and wires instead of ropes, if there's any echo of those bell wires still threaded through the brick, maybe, just maybe, the system doesn't end at the plaster anymore. Maybe the cord is the story now, and every ear that leans closer is another hand on it. I've noticed it while we've been talking, you and I. The first few times I told this, the strange rings were far apart, days between them, weeks. The longer I've worked on it, the more they've crept in. The night I recorded the first draft of this chapter, I had to stop 3 times because something kept chiming in the hallway. An elevator that wasn't there. When I sat down to do this version, I promised myself I'd keep going no matter what I heard. So if my voice sounds a little tense right now, if I keep pausing at odd places, that's why. Because while I've been talking to you, while you've been breathing, wherever you are listening, the apartment around me has been adjusting. The AC cut off about 5 minutes ago. I'm sure you heard it, that hollow drop in the background. The fridge clicked once. The vent in the bathroom made that faint rattling shiver it does when someone slams a door on another floor. And just now, when I said the word cord, I thought I heard, did you hear that right next to the mic? Tiny, sharp, like a fingernail on brass. I'm not going to play it back. Not right now. I know it's there. I can feel it in the way every hair on my arms is standing up, in the way my throat wants to close. Instead, I'm going to leave you with something that's been echoing in my head ever since I stepped out of that room in London and back into my own. In the next few hours, tonight, tomorrow, whenever your life gives you a quiet enough moment, you're going to hear something. Maybe it'll be your elevator chiming on your floor. Maybe it'll be a notification sound from your phone you don't remember choosing. Maybe it'll be a pipe pinging in the wall, or the building's old heating system settling, or some tiny metallic noise you can't immediately name. It doesn't have to be at 2:13 a.m. It doesn't even have to be at night. It just has to be clear enough that for a second you think, that sounded like a bell. When that happens, and it will, because the world is full of accidental music, do me a favor. Before you shrug it off, before you tell yourself it's nothing, before you scroll or turn the TV back up or put your headphones on to drown it out, ask yourself one question quietly in whatever room you're in. Are you sure your house ever had bells? What unsettles me most about this story is not the bell in the London townhouse or even the death of Sir Robert. It's the moment the narrator realizes the haunting isn't tied to a place anymore. It's tied to attention. The old red cord is gone, the brass bells are gone, the servants' quarters and four-poster bed are gone. What remains is the simple act of listening and what our minds do with that silence, once we know what might be hiding inside it. On the surface, this is a classic true horror structure, a documented case, a cursed location, a researcher who gets too close, and a phenomenon that won't stay where it belongs. But underneath, it's really a story about how meaning changes the world around us. Before all this, the narrator's apartment is ordinary AC fridge plumbing elevator. After Berkeley Square, those same sounds are still physically the same, but they are emotionally different. The soundscape hasn't changed. The interpretation has. That's where the story becomes oddly valuable even beyond the scare. It shows how fragile our sense of safe is and how quickly it can be rewritten by one intense experience. Once you know a man once died clutching a bell cord in another continent, a random chime in your hallway is no longer just a chime. It's an invitation to ask, what if horror lives in that tiny gap between the ordinary sound and the extraordinary meaning we put on it? There's also something honest in the narrator's confession. They admit they're part of the problem. The haunting doesn't just happen to them. They feed it. They research, replay, retell. They fly across the ocean to stand where a dead man once stood. Then they sit in their apartment and pull on that memory again and again. The story quietly reminds us that obsession has a cost. The more energy you pour into a fear, the more space it takes up in your life. At the same time, the meta twist, where the listener becomes another hand on the cord, highlights how powerful stories are. A place that most of us will never visit can still reach us through a voice, a microphone, a pair of headphones. Horror uses that connection to scare us, but it also proves how connected we really are. One old room in London, one anxious researcher in an American apartment, and now you, wherever you are, all linked by the simple act of listening. Maybe that's the quiet inspiration hidden inside this. If our attention can turn harmless sounds into a haunting, it can also transform other parts of our life. The same focus that feeds fear can be redirected to things that ground us, people we love, spaces that comfort us, routines that remind us we're still here, still choosing what to listen to. So let me ask you, after hearing this, what's the sound in your own life that you always ignored until now? If you're honest, do you think you're pulling on your fears the way the narrator pulls on that story? And tonight, when your house makes its usual little noises, will you hear them the same way? Or will you decide what they mean for yourself?